It's pretty hard to believe it, but it's already been 20 years since the Xbox 360 released to the world. For a lot of people, this was the first console they had or the first console release they got to experience. It brought so many new things to the table, like the original Blade's dashboard, wireless controllers with a slick way to show which controller was for which player, 720p 30 frames per second high definition widescreen graphics. Terrible by today's standards, but a massive leap forward at the time. Xbox Live, which offered the ability to download content, demos, trials, and full games directly to your system. There were friends lists, voice chat, and voice messaging, which was definitely used for its intended purpose. But unfortunately, it was also the harbinger for the then new $60 price tag for games instead of the then standard $50. Simpler times, man, simpler times. Oh, and who could forget that it turned so many people into console repair technicians thanks to the Red Ring of Death. I mean, why send your Xbox back to Microsoft just to get another broken console in return when you could just trust someone's post on the GameFAQs forums and throw it into the oven? But despite all of that, it really was an amazing console and made a major impact on gaming culture. Over 85 million consoles were sold worldwide, and Xbox Live championed online console gaming as Xbox Live grew from 2 million users in 2005 to over 46 million by the end of the console's life cycle in 2013. This is still Xbox's best-selling console to date. When the Xbox 360 launched, it released with 17 games here in North America, and to celebrate the 20th anniversary, I grabbed my buddy Gloom is Dead to help me with reviewing all 17 of them right here for this one video. Be sure to check out Gloom's channel, Gloom is Dead. I also want to give a big thank you to my channel members for supporting my channel and supporting projects like this one. You can join the channel for only $1 a month. We're going to start off with the traditional sports games all in one bundle just to get them out of the way. Of course, with sports games, there's only so much innovation that happens with each annual release, but these were really important for the launch of the system. I could already feel some of you rolling your eyes, so let's just break this down a little bit. No matter what camp you fall into, sports games are a dominating reason why people choose to buy video game consoles and are a big reason why a lot of people upgrade between consoles. Most sports games are made on an annual basis, and they're already in development before the launch of the system, so when we look at the release of the Xbox 360, it's no wonder that there are so many sports games available at the launch of the system. Most of these were just upscaled versions of the games also made for the other consoles, but with some changes to support the new console tech. And watching through a lot of the Xbox 360 release party and midnight launch event coverage, it doesn't come as a surprise to hear so many people saying that they were excited to play Madden or NBA or FIFA.
Let's see what Madden look like.
I'm looking forward for the Madden.
Madden 06. I'm a huge Star Wars Galaxy fan.
Well, I'm glad you admitted Star Wars Galaxy because everybody else says, it's Madden 2006.
That's bullcrap.
Let's start with the big boy, Madden 06 from Electronic Arts. It featured Eagles quarterback Donovan McNabb as the cover athlete. And actually, I had to do a double take when I pulled up this image because it turns out that they used a more zoomed and cropped image for the Xbox 360 cover art than they did for the other versions on PS2 and the original Xbox. This was definitely a subtle nod that this is supposed to be the higher quality version of the game. Looking back, this one's often seen as one of the worst Madden games. It basically was just a rushed game with many features stripped out of it in order to fit into the short development cycle needed for the new hardware. This next-gen version lacked the modes that the older generation versions had, things like the Superstar mode, the creative player, the minigames, and the training camps. It also introduced the QB vision cone, which is one of the worst features ever added to Madden. People don't like having to move the QB's eyes around while also following the player's routes and throwing the ball. And even though it doesn't look like it now, at the time this was still very impressive visually. Graphics couldn't save it from being what the developers even now call the lemon of the series. It was just way too rushed to be out before the launch of the system, and too many features were stripped out. But none of that mattered, as Madden 06 went on to become the best-selling game of 2005, selling over 2.6 million copies total, with 1.2 million of those being on the Xbox 360.
EA Sports. It's in the game.
Let's switch over to the golfer that made golf actually kinda cool for a hot minute. Some people might only know Tiger Woods from that one South Park episode, but before his fall from grace and his return, he was one of the major superstars of the sports world, and EA used his name and likeness on their annual golf series. And let's just be real with this one, there's only so much you can do with a game focused on the realism of golf. This version of the game boasted vibrant colors and fairly pretty scenery on HD TVs, which not many people had at the time. And I even went and looked this up just to confirm, and I found this report from the Nielsen Media Research Group, the company that does all those TV audience ratings and tracks how many people are tuning into TV programming. In their report for 2005, they estimated about 110.2 million households had a TV in the United States, and only about 11 million of those had HD TVs. They also said that the average price for an HD TV was almost $2,000. But unfortunately, because of the rushed development, an HD TV couldn't save it from the technical problems. Frame rates were really inconsistent, making the timing on swinging with the joystick pretty tough. The Xbox 360 version only has 6 courses instead of the 14 found on the Xbox and the PlayStation 2 version. One of the main features in these golf games of the era is the career mode, where you create your own player and you progress through a career from amateur to world champion golfer. And the PlayStation 2 and Xbox versions had this thing called Rivals Mode, where you'd sort of time travel back to play around against some of the most famous golfers in history, like Jack Nicklaus. Another big problem was the lack of autosave of all things. If you made any progress or changes, you had to manually save, including choosing the storage device that you're going to save to. The lack of autosave is pretty quickly tiresome and a problem that didn't need to exist for a sports game where you have a ton of progress and changes happening often. Public sales data doesn't break down the sales for the 360 version specifically, but we do know that people didn't like it when it came out. Golf Digest, the major golf news organization, even put it as the worst Tiger Woods game out of the 16 that were made in the series.
Gotta be happy with that birdie. Gotta be happy with any birdie.
Continuing on with EA's annual major sports releases, we have FIFA 06 Road to the FIFA World Cup. Quite a freaking long name. This version of FIFA was a separately created version from the mainline FIFA games on the previous consoles. So instead of just regular FIFA 06, the Xbox 360 got this version. This version is heavily stripped down from the typical FIFA offerings by not including all of the teams and leagues from around the world, and instead it's just a licensed product for the World Cup featuring the national teams competing for the World Cup. Being completely separate from the previous generation versions meant that EA spent their time developing it to fully take advantage of the Xbox 360's power. This shines through in the graphics, which were impressive at the time, but once again, EA shot themselves in the foot by removing a ton of game modes and making it just a really bare bones offering. There are only 3 game modes: the practice mode, the tournament mode, and the Road to the World Cup mode, where you get to play as a national team trying to qualify for the World Cup. Not actually play in the World Cup, but just qualify for it. They took out career mode, they also took out manager mode, but at least they added the ability to kick the ball around during loading screens, and that's gotta count for something, right? Overall, it was a pretty decent FIFA game if all you were looking for was to play as a national team and play maybe a match or two. But looking back, it doesn't include any of the Ultimate Team loot boxes that are synonymous with EA's FIFA or now FC releases. Those wouldn't become a thing for a few more years.
Keeping the ball for them. And they've scored. And they've opened the scoring here.
And to round out EA's Brady Bunch of sports games is NBA Live 06. Just like the rest, this one sported a focus on the visual fidelity and had this actually really impressive loading screen, which was perfect for showing off the jump to the HD generation. But of course, it also ditched the fun game modes that were present on the PS2 and Xbox versions. So you get the visual upgrades for your game of basketball, but the slam dunk contest, the superstar mode, and the dynasty modes were all removed. It is a really visually impressive leap from the previous generations, but the gameplay felt like a massive step back. The game plays very slowly on its default settings, and the camera feels strange. They also took out the ability to manually pause the game and watch a replay. The online mode only allowed for 2 players to jump into a quick match or to a custom match, with only the most bare bones lobbies, chat, and leaderboards. There weren't a lot of online features available that you would expect at this time. Sports games tend to sell like crazy at the launch of consoles, but the NBA Live series was already in a decline of sales that eventually saw it losing to 2K's NBA offering. Sales figures were never publicly released, but it's hard to imagine that it sold too well, especially considering 2K also had their own basketball game available at the launch of the Xbox 360. Speaking of, this is NBA 2K6. NBA 2K6 did pretty much everything NBA Live should have done for the leap to the next generation. It is basically just an exact port of the Xbox and PS2 versions, but with improved player models and visuals. There's no stripped out modes, no missing features or settings, none of that. EA might have gone for the big flash with their visuals, which look far and away better than NBA 2K6, but 2K6 was the better game. There's more bang for your buck. because that's all you really need when you drop $60 on a basketball game. You just need a good basketball game. All these years later, I still remember that NBA 2K6's ads focused on their improvements in portraying sweat on the players' faces. The soundtrack for this game features a bunch of hip-hop artists with new music written just for the game. None of the tracks were repurposed releases, and they all included references to basketball, 2K, or to specific NBA players. Sales figures aren't publicly available, but it's still widely considered to be a good game, and you'll be hard-pressed to find any reviews that are outright negative.
Rising up his man, swings it to Mim, feeds it inside.
And now moving on to 2K's other major sports release, NHL 2K6. Just like their NBA entry, this one is a port of the version on the original Xbox and PS2, but with some graphical improvements and some additional features. Notably, the ice surface is incredibly shiny and reflects the arena's ceiling lights to give a much more realistic presentation. You can even catch the reflections of the lights on the players' helmets, which is a nice touch. Unfortunately, none of that shows up unless you're using an HD TV, which, as I mentioned earlier, cost about $2,000 back in 2005. So much like real-life hockey, the barrier of entry to play is incredibly expensive. The main feature added to this version of the game that wasn't on the other generation is the crease controls for the goalie. You simply press the right stick to get control over the goalie's positioning. It's a neat feature that works pretty well in this first iteration of it. And honestly, what else is there really to say about this one? It doesn't fumble the bag like EA did in that it also has a bunch of the game modes and isn't just a glorified tech demo. EA didn't even put out a release of NHL 06 for the Xbox 360, so NHL 2K6 was the only option for the Xbox 360 at launch. It was a good hockey game that did exactly what it needed to do, and it was a fitting release for the next generation of consoles. And to round out the sports title block, we're moving into the extreme sports territory with 2K's Amped 3, an over-the-top arcade-style snowboarding game developed by Indie Built and published by 2K Sports. This one shifted directions from the more simulation-style snowboarding found in the first two Amped games. Amped 3 looked to bring the franchise more in line with the antics of something like Tony Hawk's Underground 2 or the SSX series, with characters named things like Wiener Boy and the opening level being a downhill jam while dressed in a pink bunny costume. Amped 3 lets you know right away that you're in for a wild ride. Experimenting with a new style of gameplay isn't always a bad thing. It can even help a series stay fresh and stay ahead of its competition, but unfortunately in Amped 3's case, a lot of core fans felt like the shift to the more SSX style of snowboarding stripped Amped 3 of the challenge and the appeal that Amped 2 had. Mix that with the awkward controls and the magnetic rails that you don't even have to push a button in order to grind on, and you have yourself a recipe for annoyance. Amped 3 sits at roughly 70%, with critics citing awkward controls and a lack of progression as a result of attempting to be more accessible and arcade style. If not for the bad controls and the dramatic switch in style, and also being part of the Xbox 360 launch meant it had a lot of competition, Amped 3 would have seen more praise and could have been one of the best snowboarding games ever made. At least it can still hold the crown for the best snowboarding game available at the launch of the Xbox 360.
Project Gotham Racing 3 is a simcade racer from Bizarre Creations, a Liverpool-based studio with a game lineup going back to the 80s. After a run of quirky Amiga and Mega Drive projects in the early 90s, they found their footing in racing with Formula 1 on the PlayStation in '96. They followed with Metropolis Street Racer on Dreamcast, which evolved into Project Gotham Racing on Xbox. They also stepped outside racers with a PS2 tie-in for Disney's Treasure Planet, and they created Geometry Wars, first hidden as an arcade cabinet in PGR2 before it blew up on the Xbox Live Arcade. The third entry in the PGR series reviewed well, but launched beside two great racing games, Need for Speed Most Wanted and Ridge Racer 6, which both outpaced it in sales. I'll keep this review centered on PGR 3, though some comparison is inevitable. Ridge Racer 6 had the pure arcade crowd, Need for Speed provided the edgy street racing fantasy, and Project Gotham Racing found itself somewhere in the middle. At its core, PGR 3 is a grounded racer that emphasizes clean driving and vehicle control. I used the term simcade earlier, which is a blend of the two styles that really pays off once you get the hang of it. The feel really comes down to cornering. Arcade games let you hold the throttle and slide forever, while sims make you slow down, adjust, and punch the gas to maintain maximum speed. In PGR 3, the slider feels set dead center. It wants controlled drifts, not 120 mile per hour dive bombs. Mastering that balance is the key to winning races. PGR3 keeps the series' kudos system, basically racing XP for stylish driving. You earn kudos for maneuvers like drifting, drafting, clean overtakes, two-wheeling, and much more. Think Tony Hawk. Chain moves to build a combo multiplier, wait too long and your stash banks, crash mid-chain and you lose the unbanked points. Each event has their own counter, and only by finishing the race do those kudos roll into your persistent career total. Raise that total to rank up and unlock special concept cars. The career system in PGR3 is fairly straightforward. There are over 20 championship series, each containing a number of events. Completing an event unlocks the next in the series, and completing the series earns you a trophy. Unlocking trophies opens up more series for you to race in. There are 5 difficulties: Novice, Easy, Medium, Hard, and Hardcore. Higher difficulties yielding more credits for winning, as well as a better medal or trophy. The difficulty in this game doesn't fuck around either. The AI is ruthless and the game doesn't care if you fall behind. If you spin out and smash into a wall, you might as well just hit the restart button because it's probably over. Now, one thing I really enjoyed about the game was the variety of events available. The devs went beyond standard races to try and craft an engaging experience that really puts your driving skills to the test. Street races are your bread and butter. You race a pack of AI cars and try to finish at or above the target position for your medal. Speed challenges test your ability to maintain a high speed, setting a required speed you need to be going while passing the finish line, typically throwing in sharp corners to trip you up. Overtake races require you to overtake a certain number of cars within a time limit. The challenge ends as soon as you overtake the final car, so you can get pretty reckless towards the end. Cone challenges force you to maintain control while driving through cone gates, setting a minimum kudos score that you need to progress. Time vs. kudos sets an impossibly strict time limit to finish a race. Earning kudos briefly pauses the clock, so drifts and other forms of stylish driving are needed to reach the finish. Hot laps and timed runs are separate, but essentially the same kind of event, where you need to race against the clock to finish the event within a strict time limit. No kudos to save you this time. Breakthrough events start with very little time, each checkpoint you pass adds seconds to the clock. Drift challenges force you to sail around corners and rack up a minimum number of kudos before the end of the event. And finally, one-on-one races are a tense showdown against someone with a much better car than you. The first 2 PGR games were known for including everyday driver vehicles in the lineup, so if you wanted to get behind the wheel of, let's say, a Volkswagen Golf or a Ford Focus, you could live out those racing fantasies you have while you're stuck in traffic during your daily commute. PGR3 shifts things up a bit by focusing more on supercars. PGR3's garage has 70 plus licensed cars, and most can be bought as soon as you have the credits. Buying is a commitment though. There's no selling back for what you paid, so the test drive option is worth using. Each car page gives you a short blurb plus a recommended driver level, novice to expert. Cars are split into 5 classes, A through E. Higher classes means better performance, but classes almost act as a secondary difficulty option, as the AI races whatever class you pick. In theory, you could run the entire career in an E-class starter. I don't know why you would do that, but the option's there. For me, I stayed in the C class for most of the game, just like how I selected the medium difficulty for almost every event. Like, I never claimed to be good at racing games, okay? There are 4 main cities: Las Vegas, London, New York, and Tokyo. Each has its own quirks and is full of different routes that are handcrafted into the various tracks you play throughout the career mode. There's also a custom track creator that boasts 100 million plus unique routes, even though that's mostly just combination math, kinda like how Borderlands 2 had millions of guns. Semantics aside, it does give you a ton of variety. Let's be honest, the racing is solid, but what people really talked about was how it looked. PGR3 takes full advantage of the new Xbox 360 hardware here, with high-resolution textures and normal maps. The cities are incredibly detailed, and cars are breathtaking. One major aspect that the team worked hard on was the cockpit view. Cars were around 80,000 polygons, with roughly half spent on the interior. Now, I'm a third-person camera enjoyer myself, so I didn't get to experience the cockpit view as much, but it's impressive regardless. Another piece of technology provided by the 360 was the online service Xbox Live. Bizarre Creations took advantage of that in a unique way by introducing Gotham TV, an in-game spectator mode where you could watch other players race. The Gotham's Hero channel showcased live races happening across Xbox Live, while the Friends channel let you drop in on your friends' online career runs. Now, of course, there were also modes where you could race against other people, but this was by far one of the more unique uses of Xbox Live back in the day. Overall, Project Gotham Racing 3 does a great job launching the series into the next generation. The vehicle handling offers a decent challenge, and the kudo system makes you take those risky drifts, even if you want to play it safe. The career is straightforward but challenging, with enough event types to keep things interesting. I don't know that I would have grabbed this over Need for Speed, but PGR3 knows what it wants to be, and it just is that, unapologetically, and I respect the hell out of that.
In the early 2000s, director Peter Jackson was at the peak of his career. After earning an Oscar nomination for Heavenly Creatures, the visionary director managed to convince New Line Cinema to take a risk on him and fund the insane production for the Lord of the Rings trilogy. For us gamers, the movies also spawned movie tie-in games that surprisingly weren't shit. In fact, I actually still have my copies of them right here. Well, technically, the Fellowship game isn't a movie tie-in game because of rights holder issues at the time, so it was made by someone else, and it's not made by EA like the other games, and it's not tied into the whatever. We could toss that one out. But these two games, oh man, these are awesome. After The Return of the King released in 2003, everyone was waiting to see what Peter Jackson would do next, and lo and behold, it was announced that he was working with Universal Pictures to make a revival of the 1933 classic King Kong. Everyone was hyped to see this movie. It had all the high-quality visual effects that we'd come to know from Peter Jackson. It had crazy scary vibes being set on Skull Island, and it starred Jack Black.
I am Steve.
And once again, we found out that we'd get to experience another video game adaptation of a Peter Jackson movie, with Ubisoft announcing their movie tie-in adaptation releasing in November 2005 for the GameCube, PlayStation 2, Xbox, and most importantly, a next-generation version available at the launch of the Xbox 360. The hype was already through the roof for the launch of the new Xbox 360 console, but this is really when things started to catch fire. I remember the King Kong game being the main demo available at kiosks in GameStop, EB Games, Walmart, Circuit City, pretty much everywhere. This was a video game based on one of the most recognizable IPs in cinema history, from a director that had just ascended to Elden Lord status, from one of the best publishers, starring all the main cast of Hollywood actors, and the game was going to be releasing on the new HD next generation console. There was only one possible reaction to this. The game opens up with the trailer for the movie showing Denim, played by Jack Black, as he's gathering the cast and the crew for the film that he wants to make. Once everyone is together, they hop on the SS Venture and they make their way out to sea to start the production of the film. But Denim tricks everyone to instead sail toward his true filming location, the mysterious Skull Island. The ships get lost in the fog and they run aground, and the group makes their way through the island trying to survive against the monstrous creatures trying to kill them around every corner. And for some reason, I never actually played this game until now, so to my surprise, the game actually does follow the movie pretty much one-to-one. We play as Jack, the screenwriter for Denim's film. In the movie and in the game, he's played by Adrian Brody. But he sounds an awful lot like Matthew McConaughey.
Okay, it's reloaded. That's okay, I got enough magazines.
And the group tries to make it to safety and get back to the ship, and gets captured by the locals and offered as a sacrifice to Kong, which is an incredibly well-made scene which also follows the film. Jack and the crew set out to rescue Anne while Denim is focused on making his magnum opus.
Would you look at the size of those legs? They're like tree trunks. Keep moving, for God's sake. Oh, I'm a big dumb investor. You're crazy, Denim. There's no hidden island. I'm not investing in your picture.
There are also a few levels where you play as King Kong fighting against the monsters and protecting Anne. And just like the movie, Kong gets captured, taken to New York, and there's the iconic scene at the Empire State Building. The first thing you'll notice during gameplay is that there isn't a HUD. You'll never even know how much ammo you have left unless you press the B button in order to hear a voice line from Jack. And there's no aiming reticle. Instead, you hold the left trigger to bring up your weapon, then you just start shooting in the direction and the bullets will hit. You can hit the right stick to aim down sights, but the muzzle flash in this game definitely did not hold up over time. But really, the combat is used more as a vehicle for the story that's being told. The whole presentation is very cinematic. It's an incredibly linear experience. You're constantly just pushing forward to find and rescue Anne, but the entire game takes place in first person and there aren't very many cutscenes. Everything plays out with in-game set pieces. It's pretty impressive for a game from 2005. It feels very immersive and it does a really good job at making you feel like you're just some dude on this ancient island of monsters. And oh brother, did I feel that. Around every corner, there's a chance for a giant millipede or a dinosaur to jump out at you.
Ow! Is it broken?
And I don't really handle jump scares all that well, so I almost put the game down after the first few levels after about the 5th time of getting jump scared by a giant millipede. Anytime you take damage, you get the red flashing screen and dimmed vision, which is a pretty common mechanic, but the visuals are so dark that it's almost impossible to see. And I played this on an OLED TV. I couldn't see shit. Looking back, I bet this wasn't nearly as big a deal when the game first launched. I mean, most people in 2005 would have played this on a CRT anyway, which would have overly brightened the hell out of the image. So when I was playing the game, I basically just crept through every area, afraid of what was around every corner, trying to keep my distance from every enemy that I saw. There are only a few weapons that you can use to fight back against the creatures that you can find throughout the level. There's a pistol, a Thompson, a sniper rifle, and a shotgun. Pretty much just like every other game, the shotgun is busted. Ammo's pretty sparse throughout the levels, so you do have to worry about conserving your ammunition. And there are spears and there are bones around that you can pick up and you can throw to conserve ammunition. You mainly end up using the spears to set bushes on fire, usually to clear obstacles to let you advance, and also to kill enemies with the blaze. But anytime there's fire on screen, the frame rate chugs to the single digits. But aside from when fire is on the screen, the game does still look incredible for having released in 2005. The jump to the new generation came with advanced lighting, dense foliage, and longer draw distances than the previous generations could do. And it all comes together into a package that drew people in and it made you want to stop and consider buying an Xbox 360. I only experienced maybe 1 or 2 bugs throughout my entire playthrough, and they were insignificant enough that I didn't even place a marker on them in my footage. The game sports the movie's soundtrack, which is why you won't be hearing any of it since it's all copyrighted by Universal Music Group, and I'd rather not nuke my channel. As Jack, you'll make your way through the jungles, encountering all the creatures, and trying to meet up with Captain Englehorn, who flies his plane over the island and occasionally drops you weapon crates. As you go, you'll be attacked by millipedes, bats, and crabs.
So here's this giant enemy crab.
And there are some sequences where you find dinosaurs. But also sequences where the dinosaurs find you.
Look out!
And for the levels where you play as Kong, the camera zooms out to a wide third-person angle, and you'll spend most of the time running and jumping from vines to platform your way to the end of the stage. And I'm guessing the developers have never played like any other game because for some reason jump is on the X button and attack is on A. And if you mash the Y button, you can beat your chest and go into a fury mode for more damage and survivability. You'll fight against the other large monsters like the giant bats that you have to dash and then charge attack through whenever they swoop down at you. And once you knock them down enough, you can rip off their wings by mashing the attack button. And this is like the most difficult button mashing event that I've ever experienced in a game. This isn't just like hitting the button 5 times and you're good. This is one of those where you gotta grip that controller hard, bend your elbow down, get your forearm pumping to finish them off.
And I'm spent.
You'll also fight against these giant leeches, or you'll fight against the V-Rex dinosaurs, but the fights themselves are just dull and tedious. You're basically just mashing the A button in order to swing and attack. There's no combos or anything, you just hit a few times, back up so you don't get hit, then you do it again. If you get near a wall that has the vines on it, you can climb up it, then you can jump off and you can hit them from the top rope.
Watch out, watch out, watch out, watch out!
But once you've already done one of these button mashing fights one time, they've already overstayed their welcome. And there's even a section where you have to fight off 3 V-Rexes attacking at the same time, and it just turned my brain to mush. I did really enjoy my time traversing the jungle as Kong, especially these certain sections where you have to place Anne on a pedestal so that she can get some fire and clear the brush away. I thought that was a really nice touch to blend gameplay with the story's development of the relationship between Kong and Anne. In the final section of the game, after Kong gets captured and brought to New York, you'll play as Kong breaking free from his bondage and fighting off his captors. This section feels like it was made by a completely different team. And for some reason, the camera controls are inverted only in this section, and it really threw me off, and I actually had to go back and replay an earlier section to confirm that I wasn't losing my mind. And yeah, I was right. Pressing left or right on the right stick during this section rotates the camera in the opposite direction. And the camera does that really stupid thing during this part where it jumps between fixed points. So as you're running down a road and the camera changes, you get all disoriented about which direction to push your joystick in order to keep moving forward, if you can even still identify which direction is forward after the camera shifts. You end up needing to grab these cars and throw them at the searchlights to stop the soldiers from shooting you, but you can't just throw a car at them. You have to wait until the camera switches to a fixed camera that's placed behind the spotlight. So you don't really feel like you're fighting the soldiers in this section, instead you're just fighting with the controls. Finally, you climb to the top of the Empire State Building, and there's this iconic moment of fighting off the biplanes as they fly by. And this scene looks so impressive for a game released in 2005. And just like the original story, Kong is shot and killed and he falls down. And the game ends with Jack Black saying the iconic line, except the game sort of bugged out on me and his lip is missing for some reason.
It wasn't the airplanes. It was beauty killed the beast.
What is wrong with your face?
Overall, the King Kong game is one of the best titles available at the launch of the Xbox 360. It's a great game, and it really does show off the power of the next generation consoles at the time. The real problem with it, though, is that it has no difficulty settings, no real challenges, and ultimately it has no replayability. It's sort of just this like 4 to 5 hour adaptation of the movie. It's incredibly effective as a movie tie-in game, like I can give it that. It really isn't often that we get movie tie-in games that are actually decent, let alone good. It had some really cool things going for it, especially given the context in 2005. There used to be a King Kong website where you could get codes and type them into the game to unlock little bonuses. There's also a fully 3D museum for you to walk around and view the concept art and some of the character models. Like, this stuff is just cool. If you beat the game a couple of times and you earn enough points in your playthroughs, you can unlock an alternate ending. This alternate ending was actually approved by Peter Jackson to be included in the game as a fitting alternative for the King Kong film. In this version, Jack, Inglehorn, and Anne take control of one of the biplanes, and they use it to shoot down the other planes and to destroy the searchlights that are pointed at Kong. Kong escapes, and we see that he somehow made his way back to Skull Island without anyone tracking him down or knowing how he got there. And the plane's engine shuts off for some reason as they circle around him, which I don't think that's how planes work. But there he is, he starts beating his chest and he does his loud roar, and then the game goes to credits. It makes no sense, but damn is it cool. People still look back fondly on this game, whether it was because they got it as their first game on the Xbox 360 or because they're just a fan of the movie. Physical copies of this game still sell for about $35 or $45 on eBay and other marketplaces. It's kind of insane. Peter Jackson's King Kong was one of the best titles available at the launch of the Xbox 360, and it's still worth picking up and playing 20 years later.
Tony Hawk's Pro Skater is a legendary series that dominated the skateboarding genre throughout the 2000s. Back then, you couldn't escape it. Anyone even remotely into skateboarding was playing Tony Hawk. The series introduced thousands to skateboarding culture while doubling as a gateway to underground punk and hip-hop music. Developer Neversoft built a reputation for delivering a new entry almost every year, constantly raising the bar for what a skateboarding game could be. And with Tony Hawk's name powering the brand, the series became a cultural phenomenon. In 2003, Neversoft shook things up with Tony Hawk's Underground, my personal favorite, shifting the series from purely arcade-style challenges to a more story-driven experience. That was followed by the chaotic, over-the-top Underground 2, which carried the tagline World Destruction Tour. By 2005, the franchise was ready to step into the next generation with American Wasteland, which launched as one of the Xbox 360's debut titles. It promised a big, open, seamless Los Angeles to skate through, boasting no loading screens as its hook. Neversoft developed American Wasteland in parallel with Gun, which also launched alongside the Xbox 360. At the time, the studio was experimenting with new techniques, and American Wasteland became the first Tony Hawk game where you could start a combo in one level and land it in another, a feat that the team was especially proud of. Welcome, my friends, to the world of level streaming. Gun pulled off the trick a little better, creating the illusion of a truly seamless open world, while American Wasteland masked its loading screens with long, barren tunnels. Sure, you never technically lose control of your skater, but let's be honest, it's not fooling anyone. For those of you who are somehow unfamiliar with the standard Tony Hawk gameplay loop, here's a quick breakdown. You control a skater, and you have a massive amount of tricks at your disposal, chaining them together into combos to rack up points while completing various objectives. In earlier games, that meant skating around a level to collect letters, hit a high score, land a big combo, or check off other small goals. Like I said before, Tony Hawk's Underground shook up the formula, keeping the objectives, but now they came packaged as missions tied to a story, with the player free to skate the level between them. The story mode added a layer of depth we hadn't seen in the earlier Pro Skater games, but the levels still felt like classic Tony Hawk stages. Each one was self-contained with its own set of challenges, which made sense since both Underground titles sent players around the globe. Underground 2 quite literally taking you on a world tour. With the next game, Neversoft decided to reel things back in and keep the setting a little more grounded. But not too grounded, this is Tony Hawk after all. Neversoft would always look to improve upon the previous entry, keeping what worked and tacking on some new features. The Burt Slide, a ground maneuver inspired by surfing and named after Larry Bertlemann, was added to the trick list in American Wasteland, giving the game that much more of a West Coast feel. The off-board character movement was expanded a bit more as well, letting you do more than just walk your skater from point A to point B. Neversoft added a handful of parkour-inspired tricks like wall runs and wall flips, giving players new ways to navigate the environment. While the new off-board parkour moves were ambitious, they also drew criticism from fans, with some saying the new mechanics felt clunky and shallow. Another tweak Neversoft made was the inclusion of BMX bikes, complete with their own trick set and appearances from pros like Matt Hoffman. Some critics praised the feature, with Nintendo World Report calling it a more interesting and substantial addition, and noted how differently it handled compared to skating. But it wasn't universally loved, as in many community reviews, some players called it a blessing and a curse, enjoying the variety but complaining about the awkward controls and inconsistencies. American Wasteland continues the story-driven structure from the two Underground games, with the entire career mode set across different parts of Los Angeles. You play as a kid running away from a miserable home life, hoping to make it as a pro skater in LA. Except he looks like a poser and he can't even caveman. Character creation is also a bit different this time. Instead of building your skater from scratch, you're forced to pick him from a set of presets. After getting your ass kicked the moment you step off the bus, you meet Mindy, a local skater who convinces you to freshen up with new clothes and a haircut. Suddenly, looking like a young Ethan Hawke, you're ready to take on the world, or at least Los Angeles. The first area is Hollywood, complete with the red carpet, the Hollywood sign, and a few whiny protesters. Before you can move on, you have to learn the basics, skating around town, picking up tricks from the locals. Then the game asks you to scare away protesters with a giant dinosaur head. Yeah, that lady's definitely dead. You find out fairly early on that Mindy is an artist. She shows you a series of sketches for a massive DIY skate park she calls American Wasteland. Her vision is to build a park made up of iconic landmarks from all over the city, and that idea sets the stage for the game's main story. Piece by piece, you'll be collecting and hauling back ramps, props, and even entire structures to bring her drawings to life at the skate ranch. The next stop is Beverly Hills, where Mindy takes you to the entrance of the skate ranch and you meet a new group of locals. Naturally, they don't think you have what it takes, so you'll need to prove yourself by picking up a few new tricks. Most of this section ends up being a refresher course, teaching you things you probably already know, like chaining a sticker slap into a manual into a wall plant.
Sticker slap to manual to wall plant.
In fact, most of this game just feels like it's trying to teach you how to play Tony Hawk. After that, you meet Iggy, a retired fictional pro skater who has gone off the grid and now camps out on the land the skate ranch is on. This is going to act as a hub for most of the game as you collect pieces for the ranch. You can come back and skate them to break them in, usually by setting a high combo on them, some of which are a little easier than others. I'm not going to deep dive too much into the rest of the story, but this might be the worst main character in any Tony Hawk game so far. He starts off so cocky and unlikable that I almost didn't want to complete the missions just to avoid feeding his ego. He does get humbled later on and becomes a bit more tolerable, but overall, the writing here feels pretty weak. Unless, of course, the goal was to really make him an unlikable douchebag, in that case, mission accomplished. To fit its semi-open world design, American Wasteland regularly drops new missions across multiple areas, leaving it up to you to track them down. If you get lost, the mission screen will point you in the right direction. Still, by the time you reach the later stages, juggling objectives across so many different areas can feel a little overwhelming. Like towards the end, when you need to impress the pros, I completely forgot East LA existed and had no idea why the story wasn't progressing. But maybe that's on me. Beyond the story-driven career mode, American Wasteland also brings back Classic mode, where you skate through timed runs packed with traditional Tony Hawk's Pro Skater-style challenges, collecting skate letters, chasing high scores, and completing objectives within 2 minutes. Neversoft even included a handful of classic maps from the earlier games, giving longtime fans a nice shot of nostalgia. There's also a free skate mode, which feels a little redundant since the main career already lets you skate around levels at your leisure. The only real incentive here is if you want to mess around with one of the unlockable skaters. That's something this game struggles with, though. There isn't much reason to play as the pros once you've unlocked them. In fact, the role of pro skaters in American Wasteland is noticeably dialed back compared to past entries. Where Underground 2 had Bam Margera essentially co-starring as a secondary lead, here he shows up for a single mission and that's about it. I'm not sure if it came down to budget or shifting priorities, but it's hard not to notice how much less spotlight the pros get this time around. On the brighter side, American Wasteland was the first Tony Hawk title to take advantage of Xbox Live, letting players skate together online in a variety of multiplayer modes. Everything from Trick Attack and King of the Hill to Capture the Flag was available, giving fans the chance to compete or mess around with friends without needing to share a couch. Though that was still an option if you wanted. Now, Neversoft didn't build this game with the Xbox 360 in mind, so similar to Gun, the only differences here are slight visual enhancements. By that I mean they just turn the exposure down a few notches to make sure you can't fucking see anything. Joking aside, I actually think the reason for the darkness has to do with new lighting techniques the team was working with, especially if this game was being calibrated on a CRT TV, which, since it was 2005, is very likely. The game also features a comic book art style for certain cutscenes, which really gives the game pretty much all of its personality. When I think back about American Wasteland, these comic cutscenes are usually the main things that pop in my head. Let's talk about the soundtrack. Now, up to this point, Neversoft had delivered 6 killer soundtracks, and maybe they wanted to shake things up for American Wasteland, but I honestly don't think it works. The gimmick this time was recruiting a bunch of rising bands from the era: Thrice, Thursday, Saves the Day, From Autumn to Ashes, Taking Back Sunday, Senses Fail, My Chemical Romance, and instead of letting them contribute original tracks, they all recorded covers of old punk songs. Now on paper that sounds cool, hearing Dropkick Murphys rip through an Adolescence cover, or Fall Out Boy taking on Gorilla Biscuits is fun in isolation, but it completely undercuts what made Tony Hawk's soundtrack so special in the first place: discovery. I still remember playing Underground, stumbling across Armageddon by Alkaline Trio, and then running out to buy From Here to Infirmary. I heard their sound, I liked it, and I went out to support the band and hear more of their sound. With American Wasteland, you lose that. It's like you're being robbed twice, once of what made the original track so beloved, and again of the band's actual style. Thrice lucked out by sneaking in Image of the Invisible, but otherwise, it's such a strange, limiting choice. If this had been released as a promotional covers album alongside the game, fine. I would have been all for it. I mean, look how much I praised Homefront's cover album. But putting those covers front and center in the game itself dilutes what made Tony Hawk's soundtracks legendary, and it's disappointing. I mean, sure, the game's soundtrack has about 63 songs, so the covers don't dominate the whole playlist, but these were incredible bands I would have loved to discover back then, and I didn't even realize they were on the soundtrack because of the way they were used. While it didn't completely live up to its larger-than-life marketing, American Wasteland actually reviewed fairly well at launch. The PlayStation 2, Xbox, and GameCube versions dropped in October 2005 to generally positive reception, with critics praising its dedication to the classic Tony Hawk formula. Some, however, felt the game was a little too easy. Jeff Gersman of GameSpot wrote that it feels like a tutorial, a sentiment I don't entirely disagree with. It often feels like you spend more time being taught new tricks than actually mastering them. I mean, in Tony Hawk's Underground, most of the levels culminated in some sort of skating challenge or tournament or something along those lines. For the most part, I enjoyed my time with American Wasteland, but if I'm thinking about going back and playing a Tony Hawk game, I think I'd probably rather go play Underground.
Quake 4 is quite obviously the fourth mainline entry in the Quake series, but while I've heard the name Quake before, I've never actually played any of the games in the series, and in keeping with my usual MO, I went into reviewing this one completely blind, so I did a little bit of research after I played the game, and here are the highlights. The Quake series spawned in 1996 as the successor and the brother series to id Software's all-time classic Doom. And just like in Doom, humans are fucking around with teleporters and end up unleashing an army of monsters onto the Earth. Quake is this odd blend of sci-fi and fantasy, with the player needing to collect 4 magic runes from 4 different dimensions in order to disable the teleporters and stop the invasion of Earth. Quake is actually the reason why John Romero split off from id Software in 1996 to go on and form Ion Storm. Fast forward a year and Quake 2 was already on store shelves, with publishing rights this time taken up by Activision. Quake 2 completely ditched the fantasy setting and themes, with the player this time controlling a space marine named Matthew Kane in his fight against a cybernetic alien race known as the Strogg. 2 years later, in 1999, we got the release of Quake 3 Arena. Quake 3 brought back some of the fantasy elements, but it also completely removed the single-player campaign. This was a multiplayer-first arena shooter to the core that eventually became the de facto Quake experience thanks to the modding community. And obviously, there's a lot more that I could talk about with the multiplayer for these games. I mean, these games basically set the standard for multiplayer FPS, and they're often featured on lists of the best games ever made, simply for their contribution to multiplayer gaming in the 90s. But after the release of Quake 3, the series went dormant until 6 years later, when it returned in the form of Quake 4.
I hear their voices when I sleep.
This 2005 release chose instead to continue the story from Quake 2, with Matthew Kane continuing his fight against the Strogg. Developed by Raven Software, published by Activision, and released in October of 2005, a console port was also announced as part of the Xbox 360 launch lineup. It was the first game in the series to not be developed by id Software, who were already committed to the development of 2004's Doom 3 and furthering their id Tech 4 engine. Instead, they chose to allow Quake 4 to use the id Tech 4 engine and to merely collaborate with the main development studio, Raven Software, who'd previously released Soldier of Fortune 2 and the excellent Jedi Outcast. 20 years later, the choice to allow Raven Software to develop Quake 4 still leaves fans wondering what could have been if id Software had just made it themselves. The game was obviously meant for PC, so the PC reviews rolled in and it got mostly 8s, with the reviewers praising the graphics and the lighting on display in this use of the id Tech 4 engine. But the Xbox 360 version didn't fare quite so well, receiving mostly 6s and 7s. The main complaints all really boiled down to just poor optimization, and one reviewer gave it 2 stars out of 5 and penned this in his review.
Activision's Quake 4 is positively shameful. Although there's clearly much fun to be had blasting belligerent aliens in the game's gloomy, hey, that's my name, claustrophobic corridors, Quake 4 is beset by shoddy frame rate issues, something which is unforgivable given the power of the Xbox 360.
It was a classic case of a console port trying to run on hardware that wasn't up to running a game that was designed for cutting-edge PC tech. You play as Matthew Kane, this time on the Strog's planet, fighting through one dark corridor after another in an attempt to destroy the alien scum. The game drops you in with absolutely no context, assuming that you've played and you still remember everything from Quake 2, which, by the way, came out 8 years prior to this. If you're a newcomer and you have no experience with actually having played the Quake games, or maybe you just don't remember what happened in Quake 2, well, you might have some questions like, who the hell is Matthew Kane? Who are the Strog? Where the fuck are you? But none of that's explained. Instead, you just take orders from the generic Marines around you, you go through the dark corridors killing alien robot-looking dudes, and occasionally you'll man a turret or you'll climb into a tank or into a mech. About halfway through the game, and after you've spent a good 4 hours falling asleep with your controller in hand, the game takes a turn. You get captured by the Strog and put onto a conveyor belt where you find yourself being turned into one of the Borg-like Strog. This scene is actually pretty crazy. It's so brutal as you're being Strogified in first person. It reminds me a lot of the scene in Prey when you get abducted, which, by the way, also used the id Tech 4 engine. Go figure. But before the Strogification gets completed, you get rescued by some Marines, and you now have the ability to bypass Strog biometric security systems, making you the only man for the job. But nothing actually changes. Despite getting off the conveyor belt and looking in the mirror at how much you've changed, there's really no gameplay impact. You don't move any faster, you don't reload any quicker, you don't jump any higher, none of that. The only real change is that you can use these fleshy stations around to heal up. The gameplay stays the same boring ass slog through dark, generic corridors. Along the way, you'll hear references to someone called the Macron, and I don't know, the game doesn't really tell you what it is, but now that I'm writing in the script and I'm looking this up, it turns out that this is the supreme leader for the Strog. And I guess you can kind of like piece that together from the context clues, but without any background, it kind of just flies in one ear and out the other, especially when the Marines start talking to you as if you know what's going on. The goal is to point some lasers at a tower in the distance in order to disable some security measures and get you in to take down the Nexus. And at the end of the game, you fight the Macron, then the Nexus, which is this giant brain serving as the hive mind for the Strog. And it's pretty on the nose for this to just be a brain for the hive mind. Really showing our creativity here, guys. And really, that's about it for the story. Once you do finally kill off the Nexus brain, the game ends on a cliffhanger as Kane receives orders for his next assignment.
Yes? Yes, sir. What is it? But, sir, Kane just got back. Yes, sir. I'll see to it. Kane, you have new orders.
The gameplay does not make up for the story in the slightest. Put simply, this game runs like ass. This has got to be one of the worst performing first-person shooters that I've played on the Xbox 360. Anytime I get into a firefight, the frame rate would just chug to a crawl. It's hard enough to push through the boring ass story, but it's even worse when the game is giving me a fucking migraine. GameSpot actually gave it their award for most aggravating frame rate in their worst games of 2005 list, which sounds a little hyperbolic, but the frame rate chugs so much that the machine guns can't even fire at a consistent rate. And like most of these old school FPS games, there are 10 guns in your arsenal. One problem that I ran into is that there's no weapon wheel to quickly switch weapons. Instead, you have to hit either the left or the right bumper to cycle through the weapons. And there is a D-pad selector, but it makes no sense. There's too many options and it takes way too many presses to find the gun that you want on the fly. There are really only 2 guns that I want to talk about out of the 10. Otherwise, this video would take way too long. The first one is the Dark Matter gun. This sort of feels like it's supposed to be Quake's BFG. You get this really late into the game and it fires these big, giant dark matter balls through the air. But it's really weird that it doesn't always kill everything in one hit. So it's not like the BFG, which always feels like your oh shit, get out of jail free card. But the Dark Matter gun did end up saving my bacon when I used it against the bosses.
No, that's a lot of damage!
The gun that I really want to talk about is the nail gun. The nail gun is this heavy machine gun that absolutely shreds enemies. And later on in the game, you get an upgrade that lets you hold the left trigger to zoom in and it makes the bullets hone in on the enemies. This gun fucks. It ended up becoming my go-to weapon, but unfortunately, the optimization for this Xbox 360 port is absolute dog shit, and every time you scope in, the frame rate just grinds to a crawl. The audio is disappointing too. Most of the time, it's just eerily quiet, and when the music finally does play during combat, it's mixed so far into the background that it doesn't actually add anything to the action. But hey, at least there are some great voice actors like Phil Lamar, Carrie Payton, and Steve Bloom even voices a lot of the background Marines.
Frankly, I don't think even one of our advanced medical facilities could do much. Those Strog implants are too deeply connected to your central nervous system.
Holy fuck! I'm coming!
Visually, the shadows and the lighting are great, but the Leet Speak menus really date the whole experience.
Leet is a type of computer language that was first used by hackers and online gamers to kind of covertly communicate with one another.
LEET is short for elite because it's common for more advanced computer users.
But nothing dates it all quite as much as the completely flat, low-res JPEG skyboxes. Up until the final mission, you'll just be making your way through dark corridors, and then more dark corridors. Then at the very end of the game, you get locked in these 2 different arenas where you're stuck in some of the worst implementations of arena combat that I've seen. There's no power-ups, there's not much armor or health to run around and pick up. There's nothing to like really make you move around this arena and fight off the monsters. And there's not even much variation in the enemy and the weapon design that forces you to switch up your tactics. And the game is pretty much a cakewalk up until these last fights. When I got into these, I just kept getting my ass handed to me, and I was incredibly annoyed by how much time I was wasting with all the runbacks just because of the gaps between checkpoints. I ended up just popping on the 2016 Doom OST as my own background music to pump me up and get through these fights. And in the final battle, I realized that I could just sit in the corner hiding from the enemies while I chipped away at the Nexus. As for the multiplayer, this is hard to cover since I never played it before the servers went dark. I know you can still play it on PC, but that's not really something I'm interested in doing. Reading up on it and looking back over gameplay footage, it plays just like the arena shooters of old. You run around picking up floating power-ups and weapons, you hit some jump pads and some portals here and there, you run quickly through doors and around corners in a deathmatch arena. Just a good old-fashioned arena shooter, which is part of why it didn't take off on the Xbox 360. It just couldn't stack up against Perfect Dark Zero and the mammoth Call of Duty 2 for the early Xbox 360 adopters that were playing on Xbox Live. Quake 4 was never added as part of Xbox's backwards compatibility program, so this console version is forever locked to sub 25 FPS on the Xbox 360. It ended up being the last single-player Quake game, with 2007's multiplayer-only Enemy Territory Quake Wars and 2016's Quake Champions being the last 2 attempts to bring the series back into relevance. Every room blurred together, the frame rate gave me headaches, and the strogification is the only part of the game that's memorable to me. It's not just bad, it's boring. Quake 4 was one of the hardest games for me to finish, not because it's difficult, but because it's bland. And a bland game is always harder to play than a bad one. For a launch title that was supposed to show off what the Xbox 360 could do, Quake 4 did the exact opposite. What a fucking shit-ass game.
Anyone who grew up with the PlayStation is bound to know the name Ridge Racer. Ridge Racer is an arcade racing series developed and published by Namco, the same company behind arcade classics like Pac-Man, Galaga, and Dig Dug. In the 1990s, Namco began porting their arcade titles to home consoles, with Ridge Racer landing as a launch title for the brand new Sony PlayStation. For years, the series was closely tied to the PlayStation, with Ridge Racer 5 being released as a launch title for the PlayStation 2 as well.
It's Ridge Racer! Ridge Racer! Remember that one?
After a brief hiatus where the series mostly appeared on handhelds and as the R-Racing Evolution spin-off, a game that had a lot more simulation elements, Namco returned to the series' pure arcade roots with Ridge Racer 6, drifting into the next generation with sharper visuals and smoother performance. It was announced that the game was going to be launching alongside the Xbox 360, a true blow to the egos of Sony fanboys everywhere. It really did come as a surprise to see Ridge Racer show up on the Xbox, but in 2005, Microsoft was trying hard to break into Japan. The original Xbox underperformed in the region, and with Microsoft being the only American company in a console war otherwise dominated by Japanese giants, they needed recognizable franchises to give the 360 some credibility. So they went after support from big names like Namco, Capcom, and Sega. Ridge Racer 6 was a part of that push, a familiar Japanese racer that could make the 360 look like a serious contender right out of the gate. Microsoft accomplished their goal as Ridge Racer 6 was one of the highest selling titles in Japan when the Xbox 360 finally launched there in December 2005, a few weeks after the American launch. Players would come home, put Ridge Racer 6 into their 360, and immediately be reminded of the legacy of the company behind it. The very first screen is a playable game of Pac-Man. But I don't need to tell you how great Pac-Man is. We're here to talk about
Ridge Racer.
Ridge Racer 6 prioritizes high-speed action over basically anything else. It's about the most arcade experience you could have in a racing game without going to an actual arcade. You know, the one in the movie theater that doesn't take quarters anymore, and instead you need to get a cheap plastic card and fill it with money and swipe on all the machines. What the fuck is up with that? This game is about drifting and sliding your way to victory. And I mean it too. You're going to spend half of this game sideways, and the other half you're going to spend wondering what in the fuck a Killick Starnose is. Some of these car names are a little out there. Keeping with tradition, Ridge Racer 6 uses completely fictional car models and manufacturers. There are 23 base vehicles with over 160 variations, mostly different liveries and colors, so there's no shortage of options. I tried to spend time with a variety of them to get a feel for how they handled, and the biggest difference comes down to how they drift. A vehicle can fall into one of three drift types: standard, mild, or dynamic. Standard is a nice balance between speed and control, easy to pick up, and the one I gravitated towards most. These cars never felt too slippery, and I always felt confident hugging a corner while drifting around it. Mild cars have more grip, giving you better control at the cost of shorter drifts. I tended to lean towards mild cars a little later in the game as I unlocked faster classes and needed a bit more control to avoid smashing into pretty much everything. Dynamic cars favored drifting over grip, and I could barely keep them under control. Every time I tried one, my car would basically stay sideways the entire race, and not in a fun way. So needless to say, I didn't really drive these that much. Drifting is critical as it charges your nitrous meter. Nitrous makes you go fast, and you need a lot of it. You could bank 1, 2, or 3 charges and use them separately or all at once. Pressing B will pop 1 tank of nitrous, pressing Y will pop 2, and pressing them both together will pop all 3 tanks at once, harnessing the power of rocket science to propel you to the front of the pack. You would think this kind of racing would be pretty mindless, but it was actually fairly difficult to get the hang of at first. I didn't even know you could use more than one nitrous tank until I looked it up. Another interesting aspect to charging nitrous actually comes right at the end of your tank. In normal races, you cannot charge nitrous while you're using it. However, you could take advantage of the speed boost to launch into a drift as soon as the tank runs empty, to enter ultimate charging. If executed properly, you could fill a tank in seconds and pop nitrous again right away. That really comes in handy during some of the more challenging events where you need all the horsepower you can get. The career mode is called World Explorer, with an X, because this is the Xbox. And this is where you'll spend the majority of your time. You are presented with a branching tree of races with open space between the lines. Completing all of the races surrounding an area will unlock it, usually earning you a new car. The tree is split into 4 sections, each tied to a vehicle class. Races are numbered to help you track your progress, but you can tackle them in any order as long as they connect to one you've already completed or are about to attempt. When you select races, adjacent races become available for you to select, allowing you to create unique events by chaining races together. I thought this was a really unique way to handle a career progression. If you really wanted to, you could just do all the easier races along the bottom row and get to Class 4 vehicles. For my first few hours, I stuck to doing them in order. The completionist in me refused to move on until I'd clear everything in the current class. That changed when Class 3 started to drag, and I decided I'd better unlock some Class 4 races so I could actually get the footage I needed for this video. You only complete a race by finishing first. There are no pity options that allow you to progress by finishing second or third like some other games. It's all or nothing. Once you clear the standard tree, an advanced tree opens up with tougher challenges. This is where the game introduces duels, one-on-one races against a rival, and quad duels where you take on 3 opponents at once. I'll admit I didn't get nearly that far. At least, not yet. But I do plan to circle back to it. The problem is, the game starts to feel pretty repetitive. That mostly comes down to the limited variety of race types. The core event type in Ridge Racer 6 is a simple 3-lap circuit with 14 competitors. There is not a whole lot to say about it, it's pretty straightforward. A few variations mix things up by tweaking how nitrous works. Reverse charge races only let you build boost while you're actively using it, while no nitrous races strip it out entirely. For you. The other drivers get to use it because fuck you, that's why. Outside of World Explorer, there are a few extra modes you can jump into. You can run single races, either offline or online, with friends through Xbox Live, which was a big deal at the time, since this was the first Ridge Racer to feature online play supporting up to 14 players. There's also a time trial mode called Time Attack, where you chase the fastest lap across any of the game's 60 course layouts. A secret game mode, you could actually just play Pac-Man. So if you're tired of racing, you could just play Pac-Man. You have to unlock it first though. Ridge Racer 6 comes loaded with tracks and variations. Out of the total, 3 are returning favorites while 12 are brand new, giving you 15 unique courses. Each one can be raced forwards, backwards, and, new to the series, mirrored horizontally, which adds up to 60 different layouts. The tracks themselves are pretty memorable too, even if it's just a matter of knowing when the turns are coming. After a few runs on each, you'll start to settle into the rhythm and breeze through them. Ridge Racer 6's soundtrack is a wild mix of electronic genres: trance, industrial techno, jungle, synth pop, and more. Namco's sound team pulled in veteran composers and fresh talent to make what might be the most unique Ridge Racer soundtrack yet. Each of the 15 courses is paired with its own track, and after a while they just feel inseparable. Loading into a race and being greeted by its companion song quickly became one of the game's most satisfying moments. The soundtrack was well liked enough that in 2009 Namco released it as a full album, Ridge Racer 6 Direct Audio. That kind of thing doesn't happen often, so when it does, you know you've crafted something special. In conclusion, Ridge Racer 6 was quite the surprise as an Xbox 360 launch title, but a welcome one. With a racing style that can only be Ridge Racer, the game is fast and completely committed to the drift. While the lack of event variety can make the career mode drag at times, the moments you do spend behind the wheel are genuinely enjoyable. Not long after the 360's launch, the PlayStation 3 arrived with Ridge Racer 7. essentially an expanded and upgraded version of this game. That left Ridge Racer 6 as a bit of a standalone oddity on the 360, a product of Microsoft's push to appeal to the Japanese consumers, and Namco's chance to carry their arcade-born franchise into a new generation of consoles.
And the next game on the list is Kameo Elements of Power. This action-adventure brawler was made by Rare, makers of GoldenEye, Banjo-Kazooie, Donkey Kong 64, Donkey Kong Country, and Perfect Dark. After Nintendo chose not to acquire Rare in 2002, Microsoft swooped in and bought the company for $375 million, forcing them to pivot away from creating games for Nintendo consoles. Rare ended up making 2 games for the original Xbox, Grabbed by the Ghoulies, a 2002 mediocre adventure game, and Conker Live and Reloaded, the remake of Conker's Bad Fur Day that for some reason is even more censored than the Nintendo 64 version, but at least it had this really awesome third-person online shooter mode. Kameo Elements of Power was first conceived for development on the Nintendo 64 before pivoting to the Nintendo GameCube and eventually to the original Xbox after the acquisition. Rare completed the game and had it ready to go for the original Xbox, but it was so close to the launch of the Xbox 360 that Microsoft asked them to delay the game until the Xbox 360 could be ready so that it could be one of the launch titles. This allowed the team to go all out with the visuals and with the audio quality. It's the first Rare game to include an original orchestral score, and it sports these vibrant colors and tons of on-screen detail that weren't really common at the time. This was definitely a next-gen platformer experience in the Rare style. Most of the footage you're going to be seeing for this review is actually recorded from my Xbox One X. I bought 2 different copies of Kameo on the Xbox 360, and neither of them would play in my Xbox 360, so I decided to just play it on the backwards compatible version that's on the Xbox One X. It looks freaking gorgeous, it runs so smoothly, and I'll sprinkle in some footage from the Xbox 360 along the way so you can see how certain sections looked on the originally intended hardware. Kameo tells the story of a 16-year-old elf girl that gets betrayed by her older sister Callus when Kameo is chosen over Callus to inherit the sacred power to shapeshift into these elemental creatures. Callus goes wild, partnering with the evil trolls and unleashing these shadow troll things that capture these tiny little baby versions of the elementals. Kameo goes on a journey to rescue these elemental sprites and use their powers to save her aunt, her uncle, and her mother that were all kidnapped, and finally to confront Callus and the big bad troll king, Thorn. Along the way, Kameo is guided by the village mystic and this talking book that's called The Whatnot. This one is just a super generic fantasy adventure story with this twist that Kameo can transform at whim into these different creatures and use their powers to platform, fight enemies, and solve puzzles. I gotta admit, I never played this one, so I always thought that this was just a platformer from all the cover art and the way it just looks. Like, for some reason, I thought this was a platformer. So when I booted this up and I started to play it, I was pretty shocked to find that it's actually more of a brawler with a heavy reliance on shapeshifting into these elementals. There are 10 elementals in total. Each is a pretty unique character design. And really the question here is, how much LSD were they on when they made these characters? To which the answer would be yes. You can switch between the elementals on the fly. To do so, it's mapped to the face buttons X, Y, and B. You can either go into the Whatnot to the elementals page, hover over them with the mouse cursor that you control with the joystick, which I always hate when they do this, or you can just hold down one of the buttons to bring up this radial menu in order to map them to which of the face buttons you want them to be mapped to. It's really awkward to change in the middle of combat when a new enemy type shows up and you start fumbling to find the one correct elemental that is able to counter that enemy type. More than anything, it's a puzzle game, and as I mentioned, the combat also has this puzzle solving element. You have to switch between the different elementals and use their unique attacks and powers to defeat the different enemy types, like using this plant thing to knock the armor shell off of these guys, or using this one to spray water on these little dudes that run around and are invulnerable unless you spray them with the water. Or you end up rolling around as this rock dude and you can lob rocks over the top of shielded enemies so that they can hit the trolls in the back when the rock returns to you. Outside of combat, you'll be swapping between the elementals to figure out how to traverse the world. And as you unlock more elementals, you end up needing to chain together different elementals on the fly in order to complete some of the platforming challenges. For example, you'll come across a ramp and you'll use this guy, Major Ruin, to roll up the ramp, jump into the air, and then while you're in the air, you'll switch to the Yeti, Chilla, to grab onto the ice wall and climb it. It's a pretty fun setup for a game. It looks great, but I think it just fails in execution. I found it pretty difficult to remember which of the 10 elementals do what, and the environmental puzzles aren't that intuitive. Like this section where you're expected to pick this plant, throw it at a tree with these hanging pepper looking things, and you make this big troll slam into the tree to knock down the pepper. Then you pick up the pepper and you drop it into one of these geysers to cover the hole. And after all the holes are covered, the door opens. This isn't so bad, but this is the first and the only time that you have this mechanic of luring an enemy into one of the trees to knock something down. And you have to do all of this as Kameo and not as one of the elementals, which is really one of the main problems that I have with this game. You never really need to spend time as Kameo, so by the end of the game, you don't really care about her or her character, nor do you really feel like you're playing as her. Instead, you're just bouncing between these elemental creatures for about 95% of the game. The only time that you're really playing as Kameo is in these sections where you're fighting one of the shadow trolls to free one of the elementals. And for these fights, it's always the same arena, the same cutscenes at the beginning and the end, and the same combat encounter. The camera goes into this basic inverted composite mode, then these other shadow things pop out. You kick one of these little shadow things so you can walk up to grab them, then you throw them at the shadow troll. You do this 3 times and you defeat the shadow troll. You'll do this entire combat encounter about 10 times to unlock all of the elementals. And anytime you're out in the world fighting an enemy or you're doing a puzzle, the Whatnot book will not shut up whenever you're trying to solve what's going on. He constantly pops up saying that he has a tip or advice for you and asks for you to open the menu to talk to the cover of the book. If you think about a more recent example of this, remember how annoying Mimir and Atreus and all of the companions are during the puzzles in God of War Ragnarok? Yeah, those are nothing compared to the Whatnot. This makes it a laughably easy game. You're always able to figure out what you need to do by just going to the Whatnot. The combat is just button mashing until all the enemies are dead, and it's so easy that I completely forgot about the system where you can actually purchase upgraded abilities for each of the elementals. Other than a few upgrades needed to beat very specific challenges, you don't need to buy any upgrades. I only remembered that I could buy upgrades during the final sequence, and I finally spent the upgrade fruit currency to get more HP and mana. And this fruit currency is only one of 3 collectibles in the game, which really came as a shock to me because, I mean, this is Rare we're talking about. This is the same company that ingrained in me that I should be forced to forever play games without exploring every nook and cranny just to find that last collectible. The story is also a mess, mostly because of the game's design. You never really get to know Kameo, so you never really care about her journey. The Mystic and the Whatnot have some pretty funny interactions, but they aren't together on screen very often. In fact, there's not a lot of characters or dialogue or cutscenes that really help explain the story or have you walk through the story. You're kind of just going from one shadow troll encounter to the next in this land, and it doesn't really all fit together. At the end of the game, you'll assault the evil troll's fortress and eventually his airship in order to rescue Kameo's mother. This final stretch just throws endless waves of enemies at you, but it's not tense or exciting. You can stick to 1 or 2 elementals and spam attacks. It's more of a battle of patience than skill. It turns out that Kameo is actually adopted, which helps explain why Kameo's sister Callus turned into Varuk Assault after Kameo was given the powers instead of her. And it also turns out that the Mystic is behind a lot of this because she planted the idea into Callus's head that she should ally with the trolls when Kameo was given the powers instead of Callus. And at the end of it all, the big bad troll named Thorn, which I honestly didn't know his name until I got to this scene, he ends up confessing that he actually used Callus to get stronger and that he's gonna take over the world.
Of course!
So Callus turns and sacrifices herself to turn Thorn to stone because she can do that, I guess. And then no one deals with the Mystic as the credits roll. Kameo Elements of Power is a game with an identity crisis. It's part platformer, part action brawler, part companion collector, and you can wrap all that up into this plot about an elf girl trying to save a land that you aren't made to care about from forces you don't know, and the whole thing is this bland, boring, completely forgettable mess, which is all the more disappointing when it comes from Rare, the developers behind some of the most beloved games. Apparently, Rare initially wanted this to be more of a Pokemon-type game until Microsoft acquired them and made them change some things around. Kameo was supposed to also be a fairy, which is why she has these wings, but then Microsoft told them to change over to the elf because apparently that would hit more with modern audiences. I don't know. Doesn't really make any sense either way to me. And also, apparently Rare planned to make a sequel, but Microsoft scrapped it because sales figures were just okay. There was nothing special about them. Especially for a launch title, you expected more. And if you look into it, there are still people that love this game, of course. There are people who love every game, but it never really made much of an impact on Xbox's reputation. even though Xbox still tries to think it does and puts it into Xbox Game Pass and all of its first-party advertising. If this was your one and only launch title for the Xbox 360, I bet you were probably a little disappointed. From a technical perspective, this did exactly what it needed to do to showcase the power of the Xbox 360 with its big landscapes, the large number of enemies on screen at the time, which was an actual advancement. But the novelty wore off pretty quickly. This wasn't the game that people were running out to get Xbox 360s to play, and if you played this at a demo kiosk or at a friend's house, it certainly wasn't good enough to justify buying the latest console.
Condemned Criminal Origins rarely makes the conversation when people talk about the best survival horror games. That list is usually dominated by series like Silent Hill and Resident Evil. I've never been especially well versed in the genre, so it was hard for me to understand why Condemned wasn't ranked a bit higher. I remember playing it back in the day on my Xbox 360 and being completely immersed. It was like a detective noir crossed with, I don't know, bum fights. The violence felt so real at the time. I didn't even understand that it was supposed to be a horror game until the shopping mall level with the mannequins, a section that still haunts me to this day. Revisiting it now, 20 years later, I can see why it doesn't get the same praise as its peers. It's clunky and rough around the edges, especially in its movement and blocking mechanics. It's easy to dismiss a game when the core mechanics feel awkward, but Condemned deserves more credit than it gets. It broke new ground for the genre by fully embracing the first-person perspective. While there were certainly other first-person survival horror games, none of them had quite the same amount of immersion as Condemned, and the world that Monolith Productions built around it remains one of the most haunting. By mixing supernatural elements with a grim detective thriller, Condemned created an experience that was both grounded and deeply unsettling. Condemned was developed by Monolith Productions, arguably one of the most innovative studios of the last 2 decades. In Condemned, you play as Ethan Thomas, an investigator with the FBI's Serial Crimes Unit. Ethan has a remarkable intuition for solving cases, something the game represents as a near-psychic link to the killers he's hunting. Structurally, the game is built around 2 core pillars: investigation and combat. Between those segments, the player explores mostly linear environments. Some levels include minor backtracking, often with new scripted events to keep things fresh, but for the most part, Condemned is a straightforward, almost painfully linear experience. Despite that, exploration still feels rewarding. The environments are ugly in a very intentional way. Each level feels both lived in and abandoned, with clutter that tells its own story. Scattered throughout are collectibles in the form of dead birds and metal pieces, which unlock reports and lore entries in the main menu. Health packs are also hidden around each level, sometimes lying out in the open, other times sealed behind glass you'll need to shatter before you can heal. The movement in Condemned is another thing that sets it apart from other shooters of the era. Ethan moves with a heavy pace, and his limited stamina bar only lets him sprint in short bursts. Moving downstairs or over a pile of debris slows him down even further, which keeps the game's rhythm intentionally sluggish. During the investigation sequences, Ethan stays in contact with Rosa, his lab partner who guides him through the forensic tools he uses to analyze evidence and build profiles of the killers he's tracking. These tools fall into 2 categories: detection and collection. The detection tools help Ethan locate hidden traces of evidence in the environment. Once evidence is found, Ethan switches to the collection tools, which allow him to analyze and transmit data back to Rosa. Each tool guides Ethan through the process with visual indicators and prompts, making the game feel like a detective story with training wheels. When evidence is transmitted, Rosa immediately responds with her findings, often accompanied by visuals on screen. She guides Ethan through the evidence, and there is typically a lengthy exposition that ties it into the case, giving Ethan and the player a better understanding of what the stakes are. In sharp contrast to the slow, methodical pace of the investigation segments, Condemned's combat is tense, a system built around environmental awareness and timing. They're designed to make you feel like you're at a disadvantage. The enemies do their best to get the drop on you, hiding in walls, circling around to flank you, or waiting until you're distracted to strike. The AI feels similar to Fear, but instead of elite soldiers, you're fighting desperate strangers in abandoned buildings. It makes you cautious, constantly second-guessing what's behind every corner. You do not want to be taken by surprise, because the enemies hit hard, and letting even one hit land can set you up for failure. Learning how to block is essential, but you can't just hold down the button and wait for the enemy to tire out. Every block has to be timed, almost like a parry. It forces you to study attack patterns, anticipate swings, and know exactly when to drop your guard and land a few hits of your own. Enemies will often fight each other as well, with the larger enemies especially posing a threat. There is a surprisingly large variety of weapons in Condemned, and each weapon comes with its own stats that determine how useful it'll be in a fight. The real stars of the combat are the improvised melee weapons you scavenge from the environment. You can rip pipes from walls, swing a locker door like a shield, or even use the blade from a paper cutter, but you can only carry one weapon at a time. Mixed in with the debris are the entry tools, weapons that serve a purpose greater than beating in a crackhead's skull. Each level features blocked paths or locked rooms that require the right tool to get through. It's an interesting mechanic, but it doesn't always make sense. Some tools overlap so much that they start to feel redundant. You can't tell me that a crowbar wouldn't pop off a padlock, or that a shovel's a better wire cutter than an axe. It adds variety, but also a touch of absurdity that breaks the immersion a bit. Since this is a monolith game, of course, there are guns. The selection in Condemned is fairly standard for a grounded first-person shooter. In my opinion, guns make the game far too easy, which is probably why ammo is so limited. Instead of collecting spare rounds or reloading, every gun comes with a fixed number of bullets before it's either thrown away or used as a melee weapon. Even the reload button doesn't actually reload, it just tells you how many shots you have left. Condemned also forgoes a crosshair, adding slightly more difficulty when it comes to lining up shots with your limited ammo. Unfortunately, it doesn't add too much more of a challenge. Once your ammo is used up, you can use the guns as melee weapons, but they break after a few swings. A strange design choice, considering the buttstock of a shotgun or the frame of a 1911 should be way stronger than a random 2x4 you rip off of a wall. Another gadget at Ethan's disposal is the Taser, a rechargeable stun gun that freezes enemies in place for a few seconds, giving you time to get a few swings in or disarm them by ripping the weapon right out of their hands. There's nothing funnier than tasing someone, stealing whatever piece of garbage they were holding, and smacking them over the head with it. Joking aside though, the Taser is wildly overpowered, and midway through the game it even gets an upgrade that can knock enemies over, or instantly kill weaker ones outright. Condemned Criminal Origins starts as a simple serial killer hunt, before spiraling into something much stranger. And honestly, the game doesn't bother explaining much of that strangeness until the sequel. What does come through though is Ethan Thomas's descent into a city falling apart, with violent addicts, hallucinations, dead birds raining from the sky, and even a shadowy figure stalking him everywhere he goes. The plot is messy, sure, but the atmosphere is so strong that it almost doesn't even matter. Most of the actual storytelling comes through police reports, creepy environmental clues, and those bizarre premonition-style visions that pop up way too often. The game loves hand-holding in the oddest ways. Ethan will literally hallucinate someone pushing a cabinet just to hint at a blocked door. But it also trusts you to make huge leaps when it comes to the city's decay, the bird death mystery, and the sudden bursts of violence everywhere. What stuck with me wasn't the lore so much as the tone. The feeling that something invisible is rotting the city from the inside out. Every new detail, the brain-bursting birds, sonic disturbances, missing teachers, mannequin crime scenes, it all adds to a sense that something big and wrong is happening, even if the plot refuses to tell us what. But where the story wobbles, the level design absolutely carries the game. The department store, for example, is still one of the best horror environments I've ever seen. A place built for comfort and crowds, now desolate, filled with smashed mannequins and hobos sprinting at you with 2x4s. Some of the mannequins are actually just people in disguise, so I just smacked every single mannequin I could just to be safe. The abandoned school hits the same nerve too. These levels are where the game shines and are a true testament that even the most insane, convoluted, vague plot can work as long as the gameplay is fun. By the time the game reveals what's actually happening to Ethan, the plot is barely hanging together with duct tape. But the finale still lands because of how chaotic and just unhinged it feels. Ethan ends up fighting this demonic monster in a fight that really tests your ability to block and also to mash buttons to rip metal pieces from his body. It's insane considering the rest of the game you're just fighting homeless people, and now we're fighting demons. The ending is a little underwhelming, to be honest. The game only hints at what's to come, and we really don't know what happened aside from a guy went crazy and wanted to be a serial killer for serial killers. Overall, I really enjoyed my time with Condemned Criminal Origins. The slower, more deliberate pacing and brutal up-close melee combat makes it stand out from almost every other first-person shooter of its time. The investigation sections, while a neat idea, feel more like pacing breaks than genuine detective work. It would have been great to see those tools used more freely, letting players investigate at their own pace rather than at scripted moments. The story is strange and fragmented, but that's part of what makes Condemned so fascinating to me. There's so much to uncover, and the game feels like it's only scratching the surface. The writing at times felt a little weak, especially when the game needs to find a reason for Ethan to go to these very specific locations. I mentioned earlier, but I would not be surprised if the levels were designed first and the story was written to connect them together. Nevertheless, I think Monolith did a fantastic job at utilizing the Xbox 360's power to create a one-of-a-kind horror experience. It's something that has stuck with me for decades, and I'm really looking forward to playing the sequel here eventually. If you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. Feel free to join my Discord and chat about your favorite games, or give me something to cover. I'm always hanging out in there and would love to hear from you.
Growing up in Oklahoma in the early 2000s, some of my favorite memories are from family outings to Frontier City. Frontier City is one of the Six Flags theme parks, and it's built around a caricature of the Wild West. Frontier City features saloon-themed restaurants, stage shootouts on Main Street, and rides like the Silver Bullet. Sure, it wasn't authentic history, but as a kid, it always felt larger than life, and I always loved going to Frontier City and soaking up all the Wild West energy. But when it came to video games, the Wild West was pretty rarely explored, especially in the early 2000s on consoles. Sure, we had games like Gunslinger 2 on the PlayStation 2, or if you had a PC, you could play the excellent Outlaws. But being a console kid, we really didn't have many options to experience the Wild West in video game form until Rockstar released Red Dead Revolver in 2004, which was a linear action Wild West adventure with a great dueling system and a mature story. And obviously, looking back on it now, this was just Rockstar testing the waters before shifting the work on the pinnacle of Wild West games, Red Dead Redemption in 2008. But in 2005, publisher Activision and developer Neversoft took a hard pivot from their successful Tony Hawk series and instead released the mature, cinematic, gritty, but also really poorly named Gun. Gun was released for every console under the sun. We're talking a version for the PlayStation 2, the Xbox, the GameCube, hell, even a version for the PSP. But the main headliner was a release available at the launch of the Xbox 360, which was the only next-gen version that took advantage of the new hardware and software capabilities. PC gamers also got a version, but that's actually just a port of the PlayStation 2 version, and it's not the same high-def Xbox 360 version. At its core, Gun follows Colton White, the son of a hunter, who sees his father Ned murdered by a mysteriously psychopathic creature. Before he's killed, Ned reveals that he's not Colt's real father, and he gives him a coin and tells him to go find some prostitute named Jenny in Dodge City. Then he pushes him over the side of the boat in order to save him. Colt wakes up 3 days later in the middle of nowhere, and he sets out from there to uncover the truth about Ned's past and get revenge on the men responsible for his murder. What made Gun feel bigger than most mid-2000s shooters was its cast. And we're not just talking about the big video game voice actor names. No, instead, Gun features a star-studded cast of Hollywood actors. We're talking Tom Jane as Colton.
You came here to unite the pieces of this cross. I never expected all this.
Chris Christopherson as Ned,
Bite some jerky and collect your gear. Time to earn our pay.
Lance Henriksen voices the villainous Magruder.
No one is gonna stand in the way of my destiny. You understand? No one. Not the federal government, not the Apaches, and not some pissant kid with a stitch gun.
And Ron Perlman plays Hoodoo Brown.
I'm Hoodoo Brown!
It's a star-studded lineup that few games of the time could match. Neversoft's insane run of successes with Tony Hawk earned them and Activision the cash and the reputation to really bring out the big guns for this one. Gun is an open-world action thrill ride that uses third-person shooter mechanics. And for a little bit here while I'm explaining the gameplay and the mechanics, it's gonna sound like I didn't really like this game, but believe me, all of my complaints are pretty minor. Being that it's one of those games before Gears of War set the standard for third-person shooters, the reticle sits directly above Colton's head, which makes it really awkward to peek around corners. You can't slice the pie whenever you're aiming around cover, and you can't take cover directly on objects. Instead, you have to actually stand up in order to shoot enemies over the cover, or you can use the D-pad for this incredibly awkward leaning mechanic. The whole thing sort of just reminds me a lot of the feeling of playing SOCOM 2, a game that also feels tragically dated in hindsight. And the actual act of aiming is what really wrecks your flow. When you push the joystick, the camera barely moves, but then suddenly the acceleration will kick in and the camera just goes flying. And it did take me a little while to realize what was causing it, but it's made even worse by the magnetism when you do finally aim at an enemy. The magnetism just refuses to let your reticle off of the character, so every time you go to aim, you're just fighting these crazy ramp-ups of speed from the acceleration mixed with these sluggish slowdowns. But eventually, you settle into a groove and you start to realize that none of that matters. Because at the end of the day, you're a badass cowboy that's killing renegades, bandits, and outlaws. And it's especially fun when you start using TNT barrels to take out enemies.
What's wrong, kid? Bastards!
The whole thing is brought home by this quick draw ability. With a simple button press, time slows down and you can flick the left stick immediately to snap to enemies. And this becomes a necessary tool during one of the early missions, where on this mission you're defending the bridge workers as they try to rebuild a bridge out of town when some Apaches attack. And the Apaches will shoot flaming arrows through the air at the TNT barrels and you have to shoot them out of the air. But what's really awesome is you don't need the quick draw ability in order to shoot the arrows out of the air. You can just aim if you get good enough at the aiming. In addition to your pistol, you can also carry a rifle, a shotgun, a sniper, and a bow. And just like, pretty much every game that has one, the shotgun is busted. You can also throw Molotovs and dynamite sticks, but the throw animations are clunky as all hell, and they're pretty difficult to aim, and they require you to be really precise. So I didn't end up using these too much when I played the game. And for some of the missions, you actually get to mount a Gatling gun or fire a cannon. Being one of those early open world games, the world is really small. You can cross the whole thing from one end to the other in probably less than 10 minutes on horseback. The whole thing is set in this super contained valley that, while it's beautiful on the surface, it just feels dead and empty. Neversoft did add in a handful of side missions for you to do. There's bounties, cattle herding, there's Pony Express missions, there's hunting missions. Hell, you can even play poker. But really, these are all just filler or fetch quests, and for some reason, the poker minigame is just dead quiet. The side missions do become necessary. These are how you earn cash to buy upgrades at the shopkeepers, and it's how you level up your stats. You can get through the game for a while without any of these upgrades, but eventually you're just gonna hit a wall. My wall was this big bad Sergeant Hollister boss fight. This dude is a full-on tank. He took no damage from me, and he just kept two-tapping me. So I ended up having to go and do side missions for about an hour to get some upgrades before I could return and take him down. And I guess maybe we should now just talk about the difficulty. This is one of those old school games where the difficult options are actually difficult. There are 4 difficulty options when you boot up the game. There's easy, normal, hard, and insane. I first tried to play this game on hard, but I gave up after about an hour and a half because you die in like 3 hits, and I was just barely making any progress, and I was just starting to get frustrated. So I ended up switching over to normal for the rest of the playthrough. I don't even want to imagine how miserable the insane difficulty is.
You ain't got the nerve to drop me. Armor, you'll be leaving here in a gut bucket.
Visually, Gun looks like a game from 2005 with all the ups and downs. Even the Xbox 360 version couldn't escape the polygonal in-game models, the short draw distances, and the flat landscapes. It was clearly a rushed port that barely took advantage of the new hardware. But where you really feel the age is in the towns. Empire City is kind of the only real town in the game, but for some reason there are no NPCs walking around. My guess is that they ran into issues with the performance, so they had to remove the townsfolk, but someone just forgot to tell the audio team, so what you end up with is this truly haunting ghost town vibe. But luckily, the character models in the cutscenes are really what helps sell the experience. You're really here for the story, and I was especially pulled in once I had to ride through the landscape listening to the excellent soundtrack. This is easily one of the best soundtracks that I've ever heard in a video game. It completely makes up for some of the visual disappointments. I ended up going to download the whole OST, and I struggled to figure out which songs to not include in this video. I've been listening to the whole thing on repeat while I'm writing and recording this script, and I'm constantly blown away with how moving it is and how well it sells that Old West feeling. And even some of the NPCs in the game sing songs to help set the mood.
There once was a Dodge City maid who was a whore by trade. For a buck at a whack, she'd lie on her back and let the cowboys have a poke at her crack. One day, to her surprise, her belly began to rise. Her slit gave a grunt and out jumped a run with his balls between his eyes. Oh, the moon shines tonight on dear old Jenny. As she lays asleep and a shadow comes creeping. With eyes a gleaming and hopes of reaming, Alhambra maid.
And if it weren't obvious from that clip, it's the mature tone that really sets Gun apart from the rest. Now, I am just gonna go ahead and cover the whole story in a little bit of a condensed detail, mainly for two reasons. One, because this story kicks so much ass that if you haven't played this already, you need to at least hear what you missed out on. And two, you clicked on a video about a 20-year-old game and you've already decided that you don't care about spoilers and you just want me to talk more about it. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that. After Ned's death on the steamboat, Colton heads to Dodge City to find Jenny and save the Alhambra Saloon. To make his way to Empire City and learn more about Ned's past from the mayor, he defends these Chinese workers from attacks by the Apaches while they rebuild the bridge out of town. And this fight is awesome, showing just how quickly everything can go wrong if you accidentally shoot the TNT barrels. And this is where I need to do a little bit of a side tangent, because this scene actually drew a great deal of criticism from American Indian leaders when the game released. Those leaders called for boycotts due to the depictions of the Indian tribes in the game. If only they'd, actually played the game, they probably would have seen that the Indian tribes are the heroes and the main character is actually an orphaned American Indian, but I'm getting ahead of myself. To get to Empire City, Colton defends a stagecoach from the attacking Apache tribes. After finally getting to Empire City, Colton and Jenny meet with the town's mayor, the infamous Hoodoo Brown, voiced by Ron Perlman.
Son, you've done the town of Empire a great service. I'm Mayor Hoodoo Brown. Should you ever need any assistance, please don't hesitate to ask.
Hoodoo is a name that is gonna absolutely wreck me as I'm trying to read this script. Hoodoo deputizes Colton and sends him off on some missions, and unlike The third mission, the two henchmen goons murder some innocent civilians. Then they reveal that Hoodoo is working with the preacher and is double-crossing Colton and Jenny. Back in town, Colton arrives to confront Hoodoo when the preacher shows up, and out of nowhere, he just straight up slits Jenny's throat. Then Hoodoo sneaks up and knocks Colton out with a bottle, and he's brought before the main villain, Thomas Magruder.
I had to waste a perfectly good whore to get to the truth about you.
Colton gets thrown in jail, expected to be hung in the morning, and one TNT-filled jailbreak later, he meets up with some resistance fighters under the leadership of Clay. Together, the resistance derail a train, free some Apache prisoners, and we discover that Colton has the ability to understand the Apache's language, but not able to speak it himself.
Now I've set many free.
Where did you learn Apache?
I'm not sure. It's like I could understand what he was saying, but I couldn't quite speak it.
Then Clay delivers the backstory on Magruder via a flashback. In the flashback, we learn that Ned guided Magruder and his army, including Clay, to the home of a healer that was helping the Apaches in 1864.
And welcome to 1864. Tear them up!
Magruder is looking for the City of Gold, and he thinks that these folks have the key, and he goes on a wild murder spree to get his way. And after that story wraps up, Clay gets captured by Hoodoo during another battle, and the resistance sets out to storm Empire City with a cannon in order to save him and put an end to Hoodoo's reign. We end up seeing a scene of Clay getting tortured. And we finally push through and fight off Hoodoo Brown, and Colton confronts him.
It's under 10 feet of water. You can't get to it.
When the snow's melting. This time of year, the water level's dropped a dozen feet or more. Thanks, Hoodoo.
You son of a bitch!
But instead of the cinematic duel that this was setting up, it's just a standard shootout, which is really disappointing, and it just made me yearn for Red Dead Revolver. After we take out Hoodoo, Colton finishes the job.
I'm Hoodoo Bro!
Damn! He ain't gonna be in Rush Hour 3.
Before Hoodoo died, he explained to Colton that Ned hid some object in a safe that sank to the bottom of the river. Colton needs a safecracker in order to get that item out of that safe. So Colton goes and he rescues a safecracker named Soapy from being hanged. And just after the two make their escape, they're captured by Sergeant Hollister. Then they make another jailbreak. Colt and Clay team up with the Apaches in order to assault Hollister's fort, and Hollister ambushes the group with a stick of dynamite. And after grinding for like an hour in order to level up enough to be able to take him down, he ends up going full suicide bomber mode in order to take Colt down with him.
Hey! You trying to hide from me? Come here, you.
Shame to waste good dynamite.
Then the preacher just kind of shows up and realizes that he came to the wrong neighborhood as Colt finally takes him down too.
You can't. I'm unarmed. You kill me and your soul will be as cursed as mine.
This is for Jenny.
Many Wounds reveals that he was there when Magruder massacred his family. He ended up hiding with his baby brother behind a rock that was way too small to actually hide them. And when Ned apologizes for leading Magruder to his home, Many Wounds just gives his baby brother over to Ned to be raised, meaning that Colton is actually the half-brother of Many Wounds, and there's our emotional hook. Then, for some reason, Many Wounds just finds the piece of the key to the City of Gold just sitting on the ground in the middle of the carnage. And this is basically the only plot hole in the whole game, but it's a pretty big one. Why did Magruder leave this behind if he was so insanely furious about finding the City of Gold? Why am I asking questions about a badass cowboy adventure to find a City of Gold? I'll shut up now. Colt and Soapy are finally able to break into the safe, and they find the other half of the key to the City of Gold, and they take it back to Many Wounds in order to complete the key. Then they head to this overlook and they read the transcription to find that the key points to the entrance. But Soapy ends up getting captured by Magruder, and he's tortured in order to reveal the location of the City of Gold.
Wait, it's there!
That's impossible. I've sunk shafts all over that sector.
You gotta dig up, you damn fool! It's above you!
Of course. Dig up.
Colt and Clay ends up pushing a cannon through Magruder's mines in order to hunt the bastard down. And finally, Colt reaches Magruder.
My whole life, I've been searching for this.
Has it been worth all the bloodshed?
How can you ask a question like that when your eyes are feasting on such magnificence?
I don't see anything magnificent. Just a fat, one-eyed bastard whose greed has no boundary.
That sounds like Ned talking.
No, this is Ned talking.
Okay, Magruder's fight is actually a really good change of pace. It's not just a shootout where you run around in circles shooting at him. Instead, you have to throw dynamite at the geysers in order to detonate the fumes and damage him. You can also use a dynamite bow that you get before this mission, which is really badass. But make sure you watch out because he throws dynamite too. Once you do finally take him down, he runs up onto this platform and he throws dynamite down at you. You just shoot him a little bit in order to piss him off, and he'll end up throwing a big bundle of dynamite that you have to shoot out of the air in order to make the cave collapse. And as the cave's collapsing, Magruder gets trapped under a rock and Colt just leaves him to his fate.
I'd like to shoot you in the teeth. That would be too kind. Reckon instead I'll take my knife and whittle you some like you did Soapy. Then slit your throat like you did Jenny. Maybe I'll take this cross, jam it in your good eye, watch you twitch. None of that'll bring back my ma and pa, or all those villagers you massacred, nor Ned who raised me as his own.
Did you hear that? You hear that?
So long, Major. Give the devil my regards.
Then Many Wounds rescues Colt, and there's this big sweeping closing shot as the credits roll. So I've played a lot of Xbox 360 games lately, and Gun is easily one of the best that I've gotten to cover. I'm shocked that I never played it back when it came out because it's way better than I ever expected. I'm pretty sure I've always confused this with Call of Juarez. I mean, I always thought Gun was a first-person shooter Wild West game, so I must have confused it with Call of Juarez, which is a shame because Gun is one of the best Western games ever made, full stop. Some of the mechanics might feel dated, but for a 2005 release, pretty easy to forgive them. The cinematic storytelling and the brutal tone really make it stand out. Red Dead Redemption still wears the crown firmly on its head as the best Wild West game of the 7th console generation. Gun helped prove player appetite for a truly open-world, mature Wild West tale. On the Xbox 360 especially, this was a showcase of a launch title. Gun isn't just good. Gun was one of the best games available at the launch of the Xbox 360. I've been covering all the Xbox 360 launch titles, and it's time for the big boy, Call of Duty 2. I know Call of Duty, you know Call of Duty, everybody and their boomer grandparents knows Call of Duty.
Playing Nintendo is not a job. Playing Call of Duty is not a job.
The series got its start as a PC-exclusive World War II shooter in 2003. The developers of EA's Medal of Honor Allied Assault left the company in 2002 and founded the legendary Infinity Ward to develop a project using a modified version of the id Tech 3 engine. Internally referred to as Medal of Honor Killer, Call of Duty released in October of 2003. Published by Activision, the game was a critical and commercial success, selling almost 800,000 copies in its first 2 years. The sequel was announced for the PC, and the series made its console debut in November of 2005, alongside the release of the Xbox 360. A spin-off called Big Red One was also made for the PlayStation 2, original Xbox, and the GameCube. Call of Duty 2 on the Xbox 360 sold a fuck ton of copies immediately on release. 250,000 copies were sold in the first week, and it went on to sell about 7 million copies through 2013. According to the NPD research group, 3 out of every 4 people that bought an Xbox 360 in the first year also bought Call of Duty 2. That fourth person...
I'm saying 1/4 of Americans are retards. Let's take a test sample. There's 4 of us, you're a retard, that's 1/4.
If you weren't playing Madden, being disappointed by Perfect Dark Zero, or suffering through the headache-inducing Quake 4, you were playing Call of Duty 2. Built on a budget of about $15 million by a studio of roughly 75 devs, numbers that wouldn't even come close to being called AAA in 2025, the game grabbed everyone's attention as a true next-gen experience. The Xbox 360 version might not have looked as good as its PC counterpart, but this looked incredible compared to the other World War II shooters of the time, like Medal of Honor and Brothers in Arms. With tight combat, a snappy ADS system, a fast time to kill, punchy sound effects, gunplay, and movement, the game quickly took off with players on the Xbox 360. Even though it's missing some of the quality of life features that we've come to expect in the years following, it laid the foundations for what would follow in the entries later in the series. Things like grenade indicators to show where enemy grenades are in your vicinity, but you can't throw them back like you can in later entries. There's no perks, no customizations, and this was the introduction of regenerative health and smearing ketchup on your screen while your character pants like a dog on a hot day. Playing it in 2025 is like riding a bike. It all just comes right back to you. Except there's no ability to sprint. Throughout my whole playthrough, I kept instinctively mashing the left stick to no avail. Old habits just die hard. For the story mode, you'll play 3 different campaigns. Starting with the Soviets, you'll assume the role of Private Kozlov in the defense of Mother Russia from the Nazi advances into Stalingrad. Then you'll take control of a British Armored Division Sergeant John Davis during a campaign in Northern Africa against Rommel's forces. And finally, you'll join America's 2nd Ranger Battalion during the D-Day assault as Corporal Bill Taylor. And of course, there are some really epic moments that only Call of Duty could pull off, and I'll just touch on a few of those that stood out to me. As the Russians, you'll be sneaking through the pipelines at the railroad station as bombers fly overhead, getting the drop on unsuspecting Germans as you rain death from above, and fearing for your life as the bullets come flying through the sides of the pipelines. During the British campaign, you actually get to command a tank across the battlefield, wiping out enemy tanks and weapon installations. What's really cool is you actually get to control the tank and drive around too, which is not something you see in later Call of Duties. You'll also rendezvous with Captain Price on several missions. And yes, you heard me right. Canonically, this is the grandfather of the famous Captain Price from the Modern Warfare games. And as the Americans, you'll brave the D-Day assault, complete with a shell shock moment as you helplessly watch the chaos. And in a later stage, the Rangers put their lives on the line to swarm up Hill 400, directly into enemy fire, through minefields, barbed wire, and mortars to take down the German artillery shelling Bergstein. Unlike the later entries in the series, it's just pure historical immersion. There's no dramatized characters, no moments meant to shock you, there's no nukes blowing you up, there's no Makarov shooting up an airport, no General Shepard betraying Task Force 141 and killing Ghost and Roach, no fun with numbers.
The numbers, Mason. What do they mean?
But the multiplayer was really where everyone was at. Xbox Live had seen its subscriber count double from 2 million in July of 2005 to 4 million in late 2006. Halo 2 fueled the growth before the 360, but Call of Duty 2's 1.4 million copies sold between November and July helped it to explode after the 360 launch. It introduced matchmaking with a party and lobby system, and this was the introduction of True Skill, an early version of every streamer's worst nightmare, skill-based matchmaking. Even though it only sported 8 players total on the 360 compared to the 64 players available on PC, it was still a tremendous success that was enjoyed by many. This entry served as the blueprint for the console FPS juggernaut that Call of Duty would eventually become. With a single entry, it made competitors feel outdated, obsolete, and janky. The multiplayer numbers and the insane ratio of people that bought an Xbox 360 and Call of Duty 2 prove just how central it was to the early success of the Xbox 360. Even today, the mechanics feel timeless and it's a great experience. It's just a well-built game that also holds up technically, which can't be said about some of the other Xbox 360 launch titles. It's just wild to me that this released at the same time as Kameo, Quake 4, and Perfect Dark Zero. There's no doubt about it. Call of Duty 2 is the king of the Xbox 360 launch titles.
Broadsword to King 5. We have your target. Commencing attack.
It's a little hard to believe it, but it's already been 20 years since the launch of the Xbox 360 all the way back in November of 2005. So I decided to revisit all of the titles available at the launch of the Xbox 360, and because there are 17 games to play and revisit, I enlisted the help of my buddy Gloom is Dead. He makes incredibly thoughtful and introspective reviews of games from the golden era. If you want to see more, you can find a link to our playlist covering all 17 games in the pinned comment below.
While Ridge Racer 6 and Project Gotham Racing 3 stuck to the tried and true closed-circuit model, EA's Need for Speed Most Wanted broke down the barricade and took the racing to the streets of Rockport. Flaunting stylish cars, beautiful women, and a surprisingly bold approach to cutscenes, Most Wanted stood out as the clear winner on Xbox 360 launch day. In fact, 1 out of every 3 people who picked up a brand new 360 in November 2005 walked out with a copy of Most Wanted. And it's no wonder why. It takes the best parts of the series and smashes them together into one chaotic, unforgettable package. I dare you to name a more iconic racing series in the 2000s than Need for Speed. Exploding onto the scene in the mid-90s, the series quickly made a name for itself as a serious contender in the racing world. Over the years, it evolved across multiple consoles and spin-offs, but one thing always stayed true. Need for Speed was king. It carved out a space somewhere between Gran Turismo and Grand Theft Auto, letting you live out your cops versus robbers fantasy, and let's be honest, it was a lot easier to convince your parents to buy you Hot Pursuit 2 than Vice City. In 2003, EA released Need for Speed Underground, dropping the pursuits and instead focusing on the tuner car culture being popularized by the Fast and Furious films. Underground introduced deep customization options, including body kits, spoilers, underglow, and a wide range of performance upgrades, forever changing the way players interacted with their vehicles in racing games. And you could do all that while listening to incredibly well-curated playlists. I was 9 years old, screaming the censored lyrics to get low, whipping a modded Dodge Neon around corners like a stuntman. After back-to-back grand slams with Underground and Underground 2, EA Black Box was ready to try something a little different. By bringing back police pursuits while keeping the deep customization the series had become known for, Need for Speed Most Wanted became the best of both worlds. Sporting that iconic silver and blue BMW on the cover and the graffiti-styled Most Wanted logo, fans knew exactly what kind of game they were getting into. While Most Wanted graced every platform that EA could squeeze it onto, today we're focusing on the Xbox 360 version of the game. The one with the beefed up visuals and that heavy sepia filter designed to make everything feel as gritty and grungy as possible. I'll start off by saying the game looks fantastic. The light reflections on the vehicles scream next gen, and the environments are genuinely breathtaking. The jump from the PS2 and original Xbox versions isn't subtle. The 360 release boasts higher resolution car models, sharper textures, real reflections instead of blurry smudges, and a lighting system that gives the whole world a glossy music video sheen. Black Box clearly wanted to show off the power of the Xbox 360, and they absolutely nailed it. But it's not just impressive on a technical level. The art direction is where Most Wanted gets its whole identity. The color palette is all burnt oranges and dirty yellows. It's like someone smeared the camera lens with motor oil. But the coolest part of this game's presentation for me has always been the cutscenes. That weird, stylish mix of CGI backdrops and live-action actors layered under heavy filters. I know I'm repeating myself here, but the whole thing really feels like a gritty early 2000s music video, and it gave Most Wanted a personality no other racing game had at the time. It was a bold choice considering most racing games stuck to in-engine cutscenes or traditional CGI models. But EA had the extra money, and it was well spent. Behind the scenes footage is great to watch now because it puts into perspective just how ambitious this approach was. It can feel a bit cheesy at times, but somehow it all comes together to make the game's world feel larger than life. The acting is a little on the nose, but you know what? It's Need for Speed, so fuck it. The career mode this time around was the Blacklist, a ranking of the top 15 racers in Rockport, each with their own unique car and personality. It's such a simple idea, but it works very well. The story itself is pretty straightforward. You start with a great car, complete a few early races, and eventually challenge the 15th driver on the Blacklist, Razor. Before the race, his crew sabotages your ride and you lose everything. The race, the car, and your freedom when Detective Cross shows up and hauls you off. After some time passes, you're released due to lack of evidence, and now you're back on the streets, starting from scratch. And here's the kicker, Razor is now number 1 on the Blacklist, and he did it with your car. The fucking prick. You're not alone though. Mia Townsend steps in to help you get back on your feet, giving you a safe house and connecting you with a guy who sells you a new car. It's definitely not the BMW, so you've got a lot of work ahead of you. To work your way up the Blacklist, you'll have to complete a bunch of races and challenges to even be able to challenge the driver. The game excels at making every rival feel like a milestone. Climbing the tiers gives the whole game a sense of forward momentum, and finally dethroning each racer feels genuinely rewarding. Whether you're grinding out bounty, completing milestones, or taking them head-on in a showdown, the Blacklist ties everything together into a progression system that never stops feeling fun. Now, I wasn't a huge fan of having to hit specific bounty thresholds before challenging each Blacklist racer, but I guess it wouldn't be called Most Wanted without it. It just felt tedious having to raise your score so high between each race, and of course the higher your bounty, the harder the cops are going to pursue you. But we'll get to that in a bit. Beating a Blacklist racer gives you a shot at winning their car, which I thought could have been implemented a bit better. The game uses a pseudo loot box system where you pick 2 markers out of a set of 6. These usually contain cash bonuses, get out of jail free cards, exclusive performance parts, or the pink slip to your opponent's ride. Considering I lost mine to Razor right at the beginning, I kind of assumed every Blacklist race was for pink slips, but I guess not. Most Wanted has an open world to explore, but balances it with the ability to fast travel to events, a feature I really liked. I don't care too much for open world racing games, but that's just me. The game keeps fan favorite racing events like sprints, circuits, and drag races, but also adds a few new ones. Toll booth races revive that arcade-style checkpoint format where each gate bumps your timer forward. And then there are speed trap events, races where the goal isn't to finish first, but to hit every speed camera at the highest speed you can manage. Every camera adds to your total, creating a surprisingly tense and strategic mode. The true highlights of Most Wanted, though, are the pursuits. During races, or even in free roam, you have the chance at encountering the police. When you get close enough to a cop car, the game slows down and the camera zooms in on the car, a telltale sign to punch the gas. Once you gain control of your vehicle again, the pursuit is on. These police chases can get brutal, especially when the backup counter is ticking down and you just can't seem to shake them. As your bounty grows, the cops get more aggressive, faster patrol cars, roadblocks, spike strips, and even SUVs trying to ram you off the road. Luckily, you're not completely helpless. Most Wanted introduces a mechanic called Pursuit Breakers, environmental destruction points scattered around the map that you can crash through to wipe out the cops chasing you. Things like dropping a giant donut shop sign, knocking over a water tower, or even blowing up a gas station. If you don't manage to lose the police, you risk getting busted. Wrecking your car or coming to a complete stop for too long fills the busted meter, and once it maxes out, you're arrested, complete with a CGI cutscene. which honestly disappointed me a little. These would have been hilarious to see in live action. But the real pain in the ass comes afterwards. You have to pay off your fines and also earn an impound marker. Get 3 on a single vehicle and it's gone for good. And if every car you own gets impounded, that's it, game over. After clawing your way up the blacklist and finally taking down Razor, you get behind the wheel of that BMW for one last chase, and the Rockport Police Department does not make it easy on you. The final escape is chaotic, relentless, and honestly one of the best endgame payoffs in the entire series. Most Wanted makes you earn the satisfaction of getting away. You have your car, now you just need to leave. And really, what better way to end a racing game than with a full speed jump over a closed bridge? It's cheesy, it's over the top, and it's perfect for Need for Speed. Most Wanted is a masterpiece, plain and simple. It became one of the best-selling games on the Xbox 360, and finding a copy under $40 today is damn near impossible. Considering it launched at $60 almost 20 years ago, that's insane. And it tells you everything you need to know about how beloved this game still is. I really enjoyed my time with Most Wanted. It took me right back to grinding Need for Speed races on my PS2, and it's absolutely a game I could replay multiple times without getting bored. The vehicle selection and deep customization options make each run feel unique, and the progression system is incredibly well implemented.
Unfortunately for me, it's time to cover the most disappointing Xbox 360 launch title, Perfect Dark Zero. Perfect Dark Zero. Oh boy, where do we start with this one? Perfect Dark Zero is the prequel to the iconic N64 exclusive first-person shooter Perfect Dark. Developed by Rare as the spiritual successor to GoldenEye, Rare took everything about GoldenEye and improved on it. Players take on the role of Joanna Dark, agent of the Carrington Institute, as she goes on several missions to stop rival corporation Datadyne from doing some crazy batshit conspiracy stuff. The Carrington Institute and Datadyne both have ties to separate alien races that are at war with each other, and Datadyne is attempting to give some hidden technology over to their reptile-like alien friends in order for them to become the biggest corporation on the planet and take over the world.
Of course!
But the aliens are actually double-crossing Datadyne and securing what turns out to be a planet-destroying weapon that they plan to turn onto Earth. Like I said, the plot is batshit insane, and I'm just scratching the surface. After dominating the N64 era, Rare continued on with their Nintendo partnership and shifted focus to developing for the GameCube. Rare went on to develop only one game for the GameCube, the terrible Star Fox Adventures. The game released on September 23, 2002, and just one day later, it was announced that Microsoft had acquired the development studio for $375 million. As part of the deal, Rare was no longer able to develop games using Nintendo's IP, but could continue to develop games that used Rare's original IP. Out of this, we got Grabbed by the Ghoulies, Conquer Live and Reloaded, and 2 games set for the upcoming Xbox 360 launch, Kameo Elements of Power and Perfect Dark Zero. Xbox thought Perfect Dark Zero would be the big killer app that would get people to buy an Xbox 360. It was marketed everywhere with ads, demos, and in-store kiosks. Xbox made sure that anyone who was even remotely interested in the Xbox 360 knew about Perfect Dark Zero. They even went so far as to call it a Halo killer. I really want to know what the hell they were smoking because damn, that must be some good shit. The marketing paid off. Over 1 million copies were sold in the first year of the Xbox 360, and pretty much unfortunately for everyone who bought this game, it didn't play as well once you actually got your hands on it. Even though the industry reviewers were lining up to give it the most succulent review blowjobs imaginable, the game just felt awful to play. It feels dated immediately, kind of like you're playing an N64 game, but with a thick coat of Xbox 360 paint. You know, it's basically the same problem that New Coke had. Sure, it's pretty good in a quick little taste test at the store, but no one wants to drink a whole can. All right, so let's just jump into the story. The story is a mess. First off, there's no backstory or exposition. There's no explanation of the characters, the setting, or, well, anything. So either you already know everything there is to know about Perfect Dark, or, well, you're shit out of luck. Set in an alternate 2020, a young Joanna Dark is a bounty hunter working with her father Jack to rescue a kidnapped researcher. They're supported by their hacker friend Chandra, who has quite possibly the worst rendition of a French accent.
Word of mouth has it he's at this offshore research facility. Look familiar to you?
Also, I just gotta point out that this bitch said word of mouse. They rescue the researcher from this Jackie Chan movie villain who does a matrix dive out of a window to escape. Then the scientist implants some research data into Jack's head and calls it collateral to ensure his safety, but pretty soon after, Jack ends up getting captured and the scientist gets killed when dude from earlier shows up in a gunship. Joanna infiltrates the mansion of Datadyne's leader in order to find her father. Zhang Li, the leader of Datadyne, is hosting a tournament for fighters in this virtual world that he's created. Joanna ends up squaring off against his daughter Mayhem, and that's Mayhem. Jack dies but gives Joanna the information. Then Joanna goes to find a doctor and Chandra betrays her. Joanna joins the Carrington Institute and travels to Peru to meet Daniel Carrington.
He's a disgruntled Scottish guard known for his lethal temper and his unusual eating habits. He weighs a metric ton. His name? Fat Bastard.
Their mission is to stop Mayhem and Zhang Li from activating a device deep underground known as the Grawl. Joanna kills Mayhem, then confronts Zhang Li, who uses the device to turn into Handsome Squidward. She kills him, and then the game just ends.
You okay?
I could use an aspirin. So, boss, how'd I do?
Perfect. The presentation immediately smacks you across the face with a cheesy mid-2000s vibe. The menus aren't even in widescreen ratio, so yeah, these are just stuck at 4:3. The menus are also themed after 2000s tech, and they're sponsored by Samsung. Throughout some of the levels, you'll find zip lines that you can ride to reach distant locations. Doing so whips the camera to this action shot of Joanna riding it, and the camera freaks the fuck out when you finally reach the end. In some of the cutscenes, including one of the first ones, Joanna is using binoculars, and the binocular view shows the left and right triggers for the zoom in and zoom out. And this happens multiple times throughout the game during cutscenes where you don't even have any controls over the camera. Joanna herself looks like she has posters of Avril Lavigne covering her walls. The character models look blocky and misshapen, and the animations are stiff as hell. The whole thing just gives me this feeling of Totally Spies crossed with Food Fight. The gameplay is also full of problems. The camera has this awful FOV with no way to actually change it. The controls are floaty as all hell. Of course, this game has to have that same fucking problem with acceleration that games used to have in their aiming systems. So whenever you press the joystick, it takes a moment to really start moving, making it feel kinda unresponsive. But once you let go, it keeps drifting until it decelerates to a stop. I actually thought that I had some like stick drift or something going on with my controller. After all, this thing is about 15 years old. But no, it's the deceleration that's programmed into the game. And even with turning up the sensitivity from the default 50 to 65, the aiming is so slow that I can't keep up with the enemies running horizontally. And if the floaty aiming controls weren't enough, the same problem happens with your character as you move the left stick. There's no precise control since the aiming and the moving both feel sluggish and floaty at the same time. And for some reason, they decided that anytime you get shot, Joanna will slide around the floor, making it impossible to keep aiming, and actually can make it to where you can't navigate the environment because you're getting slid all around as you take bullets. There's this laughable implementation of a cover system. If you approach certain walls, you can press A to get into cover, and the camera will switch to a third-person mode, but you can't move while you're on the cover. Why? To be fair, this was a year before Gears of War and a few months before Ghost Recon Advanced Warfighter, so cover systems hadn't exactly been figured out. Oh, and the game has the most pathetic excuse for a dodge roll imaginable. There's a pretty good collection of guns in this game, and each has a secondary ability that you can activate with the right bumper. Some guns, this means just adding a suppressor, but some guns, like the laptop, will deploy as a sentry gun. It all sounds cool, but you're never really faced with a challenge requiring the use of different weapons. Apparently, there's also a tertiary ability for all the weapons, but I didn't see it in any tutorials, and I only saw a passive mention of it on a loading screen one time, without any instruction on how to actually use it. Between missions, you can select your loadout. I just stuck with the base pistol and the SMG for the entire playthrough. That's pretty much all you need. With both guns, you can zoom in and you can snipe enemies. But it took me until about 3/4 of the way through the game to realize that there's no recoil when you shoot. and even aiming into your scope is clunky. Once you pull the trigger, and I mean like immediately when you pull the trigger, you'll be zooming in. There's no animation to show the gun approaching your character's eyes, so it just feels weird when you're immediately scoping in. Compare this to something like Call of Duty. I just couldn't get over how this felt. There's also this sort of cool idea that they tried to do where the amount that you pull the trigger determines how far zoomed in you're gonna be. So if you only pull the trigger about halfway, you'll be zoomed into 2x instead of all the way to full zoom at 4x. Let's be real, if I pulled the trigger, I want to zoom. I don't want to be fighting with the level of zoom when I'm trying to shoot at an enemy. The game definitely wants you to be sneaky as you go around the environments, but I found that really difficult. The environments don't really feel like they lend themselves to a stealthy approach, at least not on your first playthrough. There's just too many wide open spaces and enemies hovering near each other. But hey, I am a dumb, and when it comes to stealth in games, I suck at it. So take this all with a grain of salt. Navigating the environments and figuring out where you're supposed to go is a real pain in the ass. And the developers clearly knew this because they ended up adding in a blue arrow on the ground that shows you what direction you're supposed to go. It basically leads you all the way around the level so you don't have to do any navigation for yourself. But it also seems to get confused too, and sometimes just takes me around in circles. Chalk this game up to one of those where the fuck do I go kind of games. There are also moments throughout the game where you have to use gadgets that Joanna must pull straight out of her ass because there's no way they fit into these tight pants. There's this drone that you drive around with its disorienting fisheye lens. You'll use this a total of 2 times in the game. There are also these 2 different mini games, one for hacking, which involves this Simon looking device. All you have to do is wait for the blue segment to get highlighted, then you press the A button while avoiding the red segments. It's child's play. The other mini game happens when you go to place down an explosive, and it's the easiest pipe game ever. I'd rather play the Powerpuff Girls pipe game that was on CartoonNetwork.com than this trash. But hey, if there's one thing Rare does well, even when they fuck up everything else, it's the sound design. The music in this game is this really chaotic mix of dark synth, funk, club tracks, and butt rock. It's really jarring, but when one of the good songs hits, I kind of just want to sit and listen to it. And let's be honest, Rare's games always have the best reload and suppressor sound effects. But on the multiplayer front, Xbox marketed Perfect Dark Zero as a Halo killer, a statement that is an absolute fucking joke. The mode features 50 players, an insane amount for a console in 2005, but the infrastructure could barely handle 15. So people just found laggy matches with terrible hit detection, and eventually everyone figured out that you could just avoid being hit by dodge rolling, so everyone was just dodge rolling around the entire map. The whole thing was ridiculous, and those with a functioning brain immediately abandoned ship for the vastly superior Call of Duty 2. Perfect Dark Zero may have sold over 1 million copies in the first year, but that was entirely on the hype of the marketing and Rare's reputation, not on the quality of the game. Being a first-party game, it's still one of Xbox's IPs that they try to remind people was great, even if no one actually thinks it was. In 2006, development began on a 2-part sequel to the original Perfect Dark called Perfect Dark Core and Perfect Dark Vengeance, but those were ultimately canceled when Microsoft was disappointed in the sales of Perfect Dark Zero, which is kind of mind-blowing to hear that the sales were disappointing. But remember, the original Perfect Dark sold 3.4 million copies on the Nintendo 64, and that wasn't even a console launch title. A remaster of the original Perfect Dark was released in 2010 on the Xbox Live Arcade, then absolutely nothing was heard until 2018 when Xbox formed The Initiative, a new internal studio dedicated to the Perfect Dark franchise. At the 2020 Game Awards, Xbox and The Initiative unveiled the soft sequel C-boot reboot titled Perfect Dark. The game was canceled in 2025 as part of Xbox's long-running company tradition of absolutely fumbling the bag at every turn, so we will probably never see another Perfect Dark game. It's been 20 years and all we're left with is a great N64 Perfect Dark game and the terrible Perfect Dark game that was a disappointing prequel included in the launch of the Xbox 360.